Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Pika fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Ash Becomes Harem Protagonist. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. In the grand multiverse of worlds, exist many multitudes of worlds home to many similar and wondrous beings. These beings can manipulate psychic energies, soar through the air, swim to the deepest depths and do a myriad of other amazing things. We call these amazing creatures Pokémon. From the most common pests to ones regarded with the same strength as gods, there are hundreds of species of Pokémon known throughout the world. A true number may never be truly known, but the last count had the number somewhere past 700, and said number is prone to change once someone revives a new fossil or discovers some mysterious ocean dweller. Humans are believed by some to be a lost species of Pokémon, though this theory remains controversial. Regardless of the controversial aspects of considering human evolution, humanity has existed alongside Pokémon for generations, with a deeply rooted harmony for the most part that takes on many forms. Some Pokémon exist as pets, others as workers, but the vast majority team up with humans to improve their strengths as a team, the trainer and Pokémon traveling across the regions, competing in competitive battles, as well as other forms of competition, such as contests and the Pokéthlon, for fame and growth on both ends. Now, there happens to exist a particular young trainer who has something special in him, a young trainer shown to have an uncanny ability to bond with nearly any Pokémon he meets, a trainer with great potential barely restrained by his youth. His name is AshX. Born in Pallet town, this remarkable young man has traveled from region to region, competing in many tournaments, winning in the Orange Islands and Battle Frontier, and putting on a good show in Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh and Unova, if not coming in first place. However, there was always next time, and on his new journey through the Kalos region he has a good shot of winning it there. The Kalos region, somewhere on Route 5 between Lumio City and Camphrier Town. A floating air balloon themed after the Scratch Cat Pokémon Meowth was floating over the gentle wind-swept Kalos landscape as the Meowth that the balloon was themed after looked up into the sky. "Hey guys, you hear something?" said the Meowth as he spoke to a duo of young adults, one being a blue-haired man and the other a red-headed woman with extremely long hair, both dressed up in white clothing with large red R logos on the front. "No, not really," the female said absently as she was currently busy doing her nails. "You didn't hear some voice in the sky stuttering like a malfunctioning machine?" Meowth pressed. "Did you take the last Thunderbolt head on Meowth?" the male asked with more concern than the female showed. "No, I'm quite sure that it was your ugly mug," the female insisted loudly. Her screams silenced both of them and Meowth soon regretted having said anything. He turned back to simply looking up at the sky, partially in the hopes of spotting whatever had made that sound. He regretted it. Meanwhile on the ground, the remarkable trainer known as AshX was currently in the process of doing his second favorite activity, behind the intensity of a good Pokémon battle, eating. The dark-haired, tan-tinted young man, his ever-present variant of a red cap adorning his head alongside his blue jacket and jeans, seemed to be currently in a contest of out-eating a little blonde girl while a dusky brown-haired girl smiled at their antics. Meanwhile in the background, there was a minor explosion and a whimpering about "the future is now," but that seemed to happen enough that the two in the eating competition seemed to pay it no heed after a brief glance over to check that the blue jumpsuited blonde was still alive. Around them scampered about a few Pokémon, a yellow mouse known as Pikachu, the orange mouse Deden, the rabbit Bunnelby, the green woodchuck Chasepin, the yellow and red fire fox Fennekin, the blue ninja frog Froakie, and the red and white songbird Fletchling, all bouncing about in energetic energy, having finished off their food and just letting off steam until the humans had finished their eating competition. Speaking of which, the blue jumpsuited blonde, still covered in black dust after the latest gadget of his blew up, adjusted his oddly undamaged glasses as his little sister and Ash kept eating. "I envy both of your metabolisms," he deadpanned in utter amazement, just before Ash was about to make a grab at the last cookie, which suddenly vanished, and not because Ash or the blonde girl had already eaten it. All four humans just stared at the vanished cookie in confusion as Pikachu, Froakie, Fletchling, Chasepin and Fennekin stared at the missing food in similar confusion while Bunnelby looked on from afar and Deden fell asleep in the grass for no real reason. "Are there Kecleon in Kalos?" Ash suggested, giving a questioning glance to the other male, who nodded in affirmation, but added, "I don't think that is the case here." He gave a glance over to the Froakie who looked oddly annoyed at something before continuing with, "I'm pretty sure Froakie would have sensed any hidden Kecleon in the area well before they could get close enough to steal the last cookie." "Froakie Froak," the frog exclaimed in agreement, nodding his head to the ego-stroking compliment. Well, it was certainly a mystery and one Ash still wasn't happy about. He had wanted that cookie. So, what did happen to the cookie then? The little girl demanded as the tree behind them suddenly vanished as well, just like the cookie. All the beings in the clearing, bar the sleeping Deden, gave the empty space that was once home to a tree a greatly alarmed look, as the sky suddenly began to turn from the previous sunny day, to an endless abyss of dark, thundering clouds, as tree after tree began to vanish again and again. Ash wondered idly if perhaps it was a Pokémon doing this and if it was which one. He did however have some ideas, having witnessed an incident like this before. And it did little to reassure him. Brother. What's happening? The little girl wailed quietly in warranted horror as she grabbed onto his arm for reassurance and comfort. I don't know, science has no answer for this. He exclaimed, unable to hide his concern. The various devices he tried to take out and figure out what the hell was going on was getting him nowhere, with absolutely zero data on what was transpiring. In fact, his little scanning device vanished itself, right out of his hands as if had never been there in the first place. The older female, however, did notice that both Ash and Pikachu seemed to have quite different expressions on their faces than the rest of them. Less along the lines of, what the hell is going on, horror, to something like, not again, why Arceus, why, horror. Ash, what's going on? She questioned him as Ash could only mutter. It can't be Alamos Town all over again. The ground around them began to vanish as well, coming towards them like a giant eraser was erasing the world itself. Alamos Town? The girl questioned. She however only had a second to wonder about this, before the erasing got to the ground they were standing on as well. With no longer anything left to stand on, they all fell, screaming, into an abyss of clouds. Their screaming resounded for a few seconds before nearly all of them vanished, except for one, who kept screaming as a golden light surrounded him. Thump! With a groan, Ash pushed himself up from a floor made of immaculate diamonds, holding his head like he had just fallen from a plane. What just happened? He asked himself absently as he looked around a few times, trying to figure out where he was. The place was a palace, seemingly coated in gold and silver, with jewels ranging from rubies to sapphires to emeralds and diamonds encrusted into the solid platinum pillars, while large pearls hung over each closed doorway. The stark richness of the world he had landed in reminded Ash of something. It was nothing unless he had someone to share it with. Pikachu! He called out first for his longtime buddy, and waited a few seconds for any sort of response. Serena? He tried for anyone else who might be around. Anyone? Still, the room was starkly silent. He seemed to be the only one there. Boom! The Grand Palace suddenly was hit with a massive burst of energy that shook it strongly enough to knock Ash back to the ground and cause the palace to flash several colors rapidly. First red and green, then blue and yellow, then black and white. The lights came out in a huge set of flashes that hurt like a Pokémon's electric attack in brightly lit explosions, so Ash had to close his eyes, and only open them when the light seemed to have vanished and did not blaze as harshly as a sun, instead with the gentleness of a moon. When he did however, he saw something familiar in front of his face. A mostly golden foot, leading up to a white leg, which was connected to a large, white-skinned Pokémon with 4 quadrupedal legs, an elegant head and several golden-like structures surrounding him in a rather lightning-like pattern. This was a Pokémon that religious extremists climbed the highest peaks to hear in the hopes of hearing his message, or prayed that every bush they passed would instantly light on fire as a sign of his presence. Ash had met him on a slow week apparently. Arceus! Ash exclaimed in shock and awe as the creator of the Pokémon world nodded in reply. Hello Ash, I do believe we have much to discuss. Dominion of Arceus. I'll be frank with you, reality as we all know it is no more. Arceus began without preamble as Ash gaped at the creator in a way that would put a Magikarp to shame. You mean it's... Ash began talking, when he realized his voice changed. Huh? His voice appeared to now be back to normal. Oh yes, you might notice your voice change, reality distorting itself can have that effect on a person. Arceus admitted. Ash felt like Arceus might have raised an amused eyebrow if he had them. I will say this, your original voice is better, Arceus added. Original voice. My voice has always been the same, Ash insisted as his voice changed between 2 different tones with each word, making him sound kind of disturbing. Yeah, that's related to the problem at hand. Arceus noted with a frown. To answer the question of why reality is gone, you can blame the one they call Cyrus. The leader of Team Galactic? Ash inquired in alarm. He had thought the guy was dead, having walked into a parallel plane of existence to never be heard from again. Or something like that. He didn't really understand the explanation all that well. Yes, he did wander into a different plane of existence, and by doing so managed to learn the ways of natural spacetime fluctuations. This would have driven any mentally sound human insane, but his warped mind was able to comprehend the spacetime forces that naturally occur to ensure the world does not fall into entropy, or fray at the ends. To put it in a phrase you may understand, this process included introducing new types of Pokémon, separating physical and special attacks more logically and changing the amount of Pokémon that were known to science. It was quite similar to what human writers knew as a retcon. With this knowledge, he managed to get around Dialga and Palkia and alter the end results of their birth, essentially shattering reality and slowly remaking it into his desired world without spirit. In fact, of the previous world, there remain but 3 lifeforms: you, myself and Cyrus. Arceus let that sink in for a few moments as Ash got the gist of what he was saying. Wait, are you saying that? Yes, all your friends are more than dead. Arceus stated matter-of-factly as Ash looked at him in abject horror. None of your Pokémon, family, or friends were ever even born. That made the fact that Ash existed a complicated temporal mess, a rather minor detail in the current decay of all reality, but had it not been in the process of detonating, Arceus would have to smite Ash to preserve reality. But, paradoxes aside. Boom! The mysterious Hall of Arceus was suddenly hit with a massive force that shook it to its mystical foundation as Ash again lost his balance, only for the creator's eyes to glow blue and lift him back up using a psychic attack. We do not have much time, Arceus noted as he viewed the attacks on his palace. The temporal distortion is currently trying to remove me from existence just the same as everyone else. Arceus decided to get a move on with his explanation because he hurriedly then explained. The only way to alleviate this disaster is to send someone competent back through time with their memories intact, someone who will be able to keep Cyrus from discovering the answers to time and space. That someone, by default, is you. As Ash looked overwhelmed, Arceus decided not to mention Ash had been his third choice. He was originally going to send back the Sinnoh champion Cynthia, but she vanished before he could bring her to his hall, same with Lance the G-Man. I can't. Ash stuttered in utter shock. I can't save the world. Last I checked, you saved the day a few times before. Arceus noted about the trainer. At Shimudi and Machina you saved the world, let alone the saving of major land areas as opposed to the world as you're prone to do rather often. I can't understand why you don't think you're capable. Since I can't win anything. Ash exclaimed, some buried angst bubbling to the surface all at once. I lost in Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh and Unova, and lost to the first gym leader challenge in Kalos, with a huge advantage on my part type-wise. If I'm all the hope reality has, we're all doomed. Arceus studied him for a moment, before he glowed as a circular field of energy surrounded the 2 survivors of reality as several scenes began to play around them. Gastrodon is unable to battle, Torterra is the winner. Ninjask is unable to battle, Bizel is the winner. Ash's eyes went wide as he watched his battle with Paul and Sinnoh, but it seemed different. Aside for the change in defeat order, there seemed to be more intensity to the battle than before, like there was even more at stake in it than their last battle, which was perhaps his most satisfactory win of all time, bar Drake and Brandon, possibly. Then, in a familiar scene Infernape defeated Electivire, as the call was made. Electivire is unable to battle, the winner is Infernape. The battle, and the Sinnoh championship, goes to Ash of Pallet Town. Ash stared wide-eyed at the scene as Arceus rewound the scene once more, to some quick montages of battles before it. Ash defeats Nando and goes on to the final 8. Ash defeats Conway and advances to the final 4. Ash defeats Barry and advances to the finals. Then the scene was fast-forwarded again, to Unova. Ash has defeated Cameron, our foreign favorite. Ash has passed the top 32. Cameron's Lucario found itself at the mercy of Pignite's Fire Pledge while Hydreigon was decimated by Leavanny's X-Scissor with Swarm's Boost. By defeating Bianca, Ash goes on to top 16. The announcer yelled, with an image of Palpitoad taking down Emboar with Hydro Pump. Virgil has been defeated, and with that Ash goes on to the final 8. Virgil's Eevee was knocked out by a powerful rock smash from Boulder. In his victory over Stefan, Ash has advanced to the final 4. Like what was true to Ash, Crocodile took down Sock with Aerial Ace. With that victory over Trip, Ash is going on to the finals. Pikachu again took down Superior while scenes from prior battles showed Oshawott taking down a Vanillux while Unpheasant bested Conkeldurr and Snivy a Jellicent. Ash then found himself watching a brutal battle with Tobias of all people, whose Darkrai and Latios were the only Pokémon of his. Ash got a good look at as it seemed the other him had decided to go fishing in the old Pokémon pool, considering he was seeing Sceptile fighting Darkrai again while a later scene showed Crocodile battling Latios, with a scoreboard that revealed Heracross had battled Darkrai, and lost, and a returned Sceptile after battling Darkrai. The match fast-forwarded, with a scoreboard showing Heracross, Sceptile, Crocodile, Infernape, Charizard and Pikachu as having battled and defeated Tobias, hoisting the Unova trophy with the Unova Pokémon in the background cheering. The series of fast-forwarded images just left Ash in a confused state of shock. Did Arceus feel like trying to taunt him with what he should be like, yet didn't seem to be? One doesn't simply destroy reality with one slide of his hand. Arceus noted to Ash. You have to practice manipulating time, and you were his test subject in that matter. Ash looked on with growing horror as Arceus elaborated. To figure out the way to do all the temporal alterations he wanted in one go, as to prevent me from detecting him, he practiced with far smaller changes. To phrase it in human terms, he chose to do so by being a complete D to you and pretty much randomly screw up your competency level of both your mind and your Pokémon's physical abilities. Practically every odd loss you had in Sinnoh, Unova and Kalos is a result of Cyrus messing with you. Ash just stared at the future that should have been in astonishment. So that I'm not a failure? No. Arceus noted with an affirmative nod. And all my losses since the Battle Frontier were all because of. Arceus suddenly laughed as the scenes around them showed the battle between Gary's Electivire and Pikachu, as well as the battle at Lake Acuity. Oh no, you still lose fights every so often completely of your own accord. No one is perfect. Arceus almost sounded amused at reminding Ash he wasn't perfection incarnate. After Ash regained his composure after that scathing reminder, Arceus derailed the conversation back to saving the world. So, now that we've gotten that sorted out, I shall send you back to the past to the day you first became a trainer. At Ash's questioning gaze, Arceus gave him a stare to silence his question and explained, I do this because the world cannot afford a second disruption of all time and space, thus requiring you to prepare as much as possible for Cyrus's scheme, though I do recognize sending you back to the day of your birth could possibly ruin your sanity. Also, as I realize that as a Pokémon trainer, you understand the need of teamwork, thus I shall grant you the ability to restore the memories of. Boom boom boom. A much more powerful explosion shook the palace of the Pokémon creator, as Arceus stared at Ash in quite evident alarm, more so than when he had believed himself betrayed by Deimos. There isn't enough time to do this nearly as complete as I'd like it to. Arceus focused on Ash as an orange glow surrounded Ash while the entire palace shook more and more violently. Unlike Dialga, I need more focus to send someone cleanly through time like you experienced before. You will be able to restore memories, but not as perfectly and evenly as I'd had hoped to grant you, and not as flexibly, and the distortions to the original timeline may have unpredictable consequences, but it's the best chance we all have. Boom 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 boom. The shaking got worse as Ash's orange glow stopped in a manner similar to a blacked-out video game, with a similar feeling of being incomplete as a somewhat shaky blue orb formed around Ash. Best of luck to you, hopefully you won't wake up to find yourself of the opposite gender or a Pokémon or something that offsetting to you, and don't expect me to remember anything in the new timeline, so I may try to kill you next time we meet, no offense. Before Ash could voice his confusion and horror at such a scenario, the blue orb burst into light as Ash vanished, just seconds before the entire palace imploded out of existence, with Arceus in it. The folds of time. Strange lights and sounds overloaded Ash's mortal senses as he fell through an indescribable vortex, screaming all the way as his voice kept changing from one voice to another, as phrases began to be whispered into his ear in a tongue that seemed to be made of every voice Ash had ever heard, all as one and yet all off. Bloodline. Dominion. Species. Heart. Attack. Merge. Prophecy. Family. Shadow. Aura. Power. Love. Rage. Hate. Mega. Secrets. Death? These and hundreds of other words assaulted Ash, the boy barely able to keep them all straight as a new, burning light filled the unspeakable vortex. The bright light engulfed Ash, and for the moment, he knew no more. Ash opened his eyes to find himself in a dark place, with no lights, yet oddly enough it felt familiar to him, despite the lack of visibility. Blinking, his mind, rightfully confused about what had just happened, end of reality and all, he looked around for a moment and figured out why the place felt familiar to him. It was his room, and the clock by his bedside that he did not have the last time, it had numbers on it, how fancy, said it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Pushing himself out of bed, Ash moved a hand in front of his face, glad to see it was the same as he recalled it, with no fur, claws or wings. Or a tail for that matter. So, he was still human, and a quick feel over his chest revealed he was also still male, so nothing really seemed to have changed. It was when his hand made contact with his face that he felt something to be very, very wrong. There was hair on it, short and stubby but present in places it had never been in before. In alarm, he bolted out of bed, flipped the nearest light switch on and stared at himself in the mirror to view something he had never had to deal with before. Facial hair. He had a 5 o'clock shadow on a face that looked somewhat older. And in retrospect Ash realized he felt taller than before. So that it would seem he was older. The question was how older. All he could really tell was that he was likely in his teens, so looking on the bright side he was not waking up to find himself as old as Professor Oak. After a few moments of trying to think, he found his mind to be in a state of chaos. It seemed as if any attempt by himself to get a grasp of what was different was virtually impossible. The whole, going back in time with all your memories into an altered timeline with its own memories, was a way to have issues with accessing either memory in great detail. Though it seemed to be slowly righting itself, Ash found in a few moments that he had regained a momentarily useful memory from this timeline about learning how to shave off the off-putting facial fuzz. With that minute annoyance dealt with, he was starting to have a clearer head and could actually recall a bit more. Okay, I still live in Pallet Town, my mom is still the same, Professor Oak is still here and as far as I can recall isn't any different. He spoke to himself out loud due to the difficulty of getting anything straight in his mind at the moment, and he had heard saying things out loud was good for recall, and my father is. After trying to ponder that question again, Ash gave up. It was, for whatever reason, still a mess for him to recall from either timeline and he had other things to consider. Like why the hell he was still at home, if he was the age he was. Whatever age it was, people started to grow facial hair. With the light on, he did manage to spy something potentially useful, a videotape with a pokeball on it and the remains of a mail package that had the name Oak on it. Ash moved to put the tape in. Before recalling the time in the original timeline he had the radio on, low volume, at night. His mom was many things but a heavy sleeper she was not. This also seemed to be similarly true in this timeline. Grimacing at the possible premature end of his Pokémon journey, he finally managed to spy a pair of headphones and the jack for them on his television, oddly sitting on a letter. Ah, technology is so amazing. Ash picked up the large headphones, big enough to fit even Pikachu's ears, when he saw who the letter was from. Serena. Oh yeah, I remember now, he observed, seeing that the letter accelerated that part of his still distorted memories. I actually stayed in touch with her. Memories came to him about her mother and an accident with a Rhyhorn causing her to leave camp earlier. Man, that made him feel less like a JRK, and oddly at the same time more like a JRK for not doing it in the old timeline. Maybe I should just plug in the tape before I start feeling bipolar again, Ash said to himself before adding, and I probably need to stop talking to myself before it becomes a habit. A tape plop later. Greetings trainer, I am Professor Oak. If you have received this videotape, you have passed the Pokemon Trainer test and are soon to become a Pokemon Trainer. The screen showed the world-renowned Pokemon professor in his laboratory, which didn't seem to have changed either. This test can be taken in many ways, but to receive a starter Pokemon from me you would have had to complete my Pokemon Summer Camp and complete the test at the end of it, after passing it at a 90% or higher. You also have to be 15, but seeing as the camp is only open to 14-year-olds and the 151 question test takes far too long to grade, I believe you should all be 15 by now. Far too long to grade, yeah right? Professor Oak was probably just too busy doing Pokemon research and put it off. Well, at least he found out he was good to know. He suddenly flinched in pain as he recalled the 151 question test. He was pretty sure he got question 137 wrong. Porygon could not learn Safeguard. Any trainer starting from my laboratory can begin with either Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. To emphasize this, the professor released the specifically named one from a pair of Pokeballs on the table. As trainers, you will grow with your Pokemon, becoming stronger together and learning more about yourself and the world at large. Now, while you can start out with any Pokemon, as do many famous and skilled trainers, only those who pass my summer camp can start with the Kanto starter Pokemon, which are extremely rare in the wild. Now, all trainers must arrive at my Pokemon laboratory at exactly 8, any trainer who fails to show up will not receive a starter. Ash had never heard the professor sound that serious, and that brought up a really worrying question. If he couldn't be late, that means that he would have to choose one of the starters, and not Pikachu. What happened if he couldn't go about it with his best buddy? Or would his Pikachu be a Charmander this time around? Then what would happen with his Charmander Charizard? Now, allow me to remind you about the legal obligations you agreed to upon taking the Pokemon Trainer test and start from my laboratory. Thankfully, all deep trans-timeline questions in Ash's head were drowned out by hearing the totally boring legalese, which promptly knocked Ash out like a light. 7:55 a.m., just downhill from Professor Oak's laboratory. Ash made it. Somehow Ash had made it through what remained of the night without breaking the alarm. He ate the breakfast his mother cooked for him, which was just as good as in the old timeline. Oddly enough, she already had Mimey who spared him clean-up duty today, and got to the lab with 5 minutes to spare. Best of all, he finally recalled that in this timeline, Gary was the only one to pass the test aside for himself, and if he took Squirtle like he did the last time, well, the question of Pikachu possibly reincarnating would still have to be figured out. However, his thoughts were quickly broken free of their temporal depths to the sight of Professor Oak arguing with a rather tall guy, aka the same size of guy LT Surge was, in a black suit like something out of the Men in Black myth. "Your cooperation was most appreciated, Professor," the man stated in a cold voice as he began to walk away, leaving behind a despondent Professor. "I'll be sure to inform him of your cooperation in time for the next meeting on grants." It was this dejected Professor that Ash approached, as the old man looked up to see him, and looked like he had aged another decade. "Oh Ash," he said in a depressed tone, "I'm so sorry, but what, Professor?" Ash wasn't sure what was going on. Who was the big scary man? Did Oak get foreclosed or something? "The starter Pokémon are gone. I'm sorry." 7:57 a.m., the Oak study. "The man you just saw was the crony of a government official," Oak began as he sat down with Ash, a cup of tea shared between devastated Professor and just plain shocked trainer-to-be. "He was sent by the father of a pair of twins who attended the summer camp the same time as you, but in a different cabin, so I don't believe you would know them. While the twins passed the test by regular standards, they did not pass it by the standards required by my laboratory, so they were not selected to receive starter Pokémon. This is in part, as you may recall, due to the Starter Pokémon International Treaty, which states the rare Pokémon given to trainers as starting partners need to be the highest caliber, in part to control the black market trade of them. However, their father decided to enlighten me of upcoming budget cuts." Oak hunched over in greater depression as Ash listened on, vaguely aware of some of these regulations due to still fuzzy memories. In his defense, 2 timelines of memories took a long time to settle down. "He sits as the head chair of the research grant committee, meaning he has say of where the money goes, and I barely get enough money as it is to run this facility even with my writing income. So, it was either hand over starters for the twins, or have to cut back on the Pokemon's feeding bills just to ensure the bare minimum scientific work required to get government funding in the first place. The only good thing about all this is that, while the father is an outright butt, his children are spoiled sweet and actually love Pokemon, so I believe nothing ill will come of either Charmander or Bulbasaur." Ash was feeling what the professor went though. That was a difficult, yet easy decision to make. It ruined him, but saved the lab. He couldn't fault him. It might possibly have just doomed the world, again, but it wasn't like Professor Oak was aware of this. "I understand, Professor," Ash said in a disappointing, but understanding voice. "Guess there's always next." Oak suddenly looked like inspiration hit him. "I've just thought of a splendid idea, my young friend. I may not be able to give you a traditional starter Pokémon, but I can still offer you a proper selection." Ash rose a confused eyebrow, though he had an oddly good feeling about where this was going. 8 o'clock, Oak Pokeball Storage Room. "See my boy, this laboratory is the home away from the Pokeball for all the trainers who started out from here. Part of the reason I give out starter Pokemon to trainers is the agreement for them to keep their additional Pokemon here, allowing me to study the human Pokemon dynamic in greater detail," Oak continued to explain to Ash, unaware of the fact Ash had gotten a version of this talk when he came back to Pallet after his 8 badge was won. "While this is beneficial in many ways, it does cause the food bill to be astronomical, though it does have one, somewhat interesting side effect." The two of them were in a storage room lined with several dozen Pokeballs. "I have often found myself with Pokemon eggs, which I hatch and keep around the research facility, as I am unable to send them to trainers in faraway lands safely. I keep a few around the lab in case a well-meaning, non-camp student needs a leg up for their Pokemon journey if they have the right stuff. While you will be given a Pokédex as part of passing the starter requirements, you will have to begin with one of these Pokemon." Ash gulped, hoping to Arceus in whatever timeline his buddy was in one of these Pokeballs. "So, do I take the first one I pick or?" "Oh no, you can have a look at as many as you need to until you find the right fit," Oak announced and then smiled as Ash took the first Pokeball on the row and called out, "Pokemon, I choose you." The ball released a burst of light that began to form into a shape that Oak recognized, and mentally prepared himself for Ash's imminent pain, as the mouse-like form solidified. That one is a little irritable, you may want to try another one." Oak recalled the last few trainers who tried to connect with this one, and got shocked. However, as the yellow mouse Pikachu formed in front of Ash, and did its initial glare, cheek spark routine, Ash smiled a smile Oak couldn't see as he reached his hand out towards the mouse Pokemon. Pikachu sparked his cheeks again, trying to scare him off, before Ash's hand touched Pikachu on the head and it suddenly stopped looking ready to fry Ash. In fact, it ran over to him and let Ash pick it up as Professor Oak stared in shock. Well, that was impressive. That Pikachu has a nasty habit of trying to kill anyone who tries to interact with it that doesn't bribe it with ketchup. So, I'm taking it you want to start with an electric type? The professor inquired, hoping so because he had just ran out of ketchup and didn't have any more room in the budget for it. Ash nodded, Pikachu squirming out of his arms and retook its old place on his shoulder. Well, all I can say is good luck to you, my boy. Now allow me to set up your Pokédex and Pokeballs before you head out. Far too later on, outside. Oh, it's so cute. His mother was all over the Pikachu that rested on his shoulder, though this time around she was the only one here aside from Mimi, as opposed to a semi-unruly mob of local citizens. She didn't have to bring his stuff this time around. He had fully dressed in the same sort of clothes he started his journey with, if made to fit his 15-year-old body. She looked the same as ever, a brunette dressed in pink and looking quite young and attractive, even though he was now taller than her due to having aged so much. So, you're letting it stay out of the Pokeball? How Jado of you, she nodded as she gave him one last hug. Well, take care now. She let him go as Ash waved goodbye and started walking towards Route. I will. Don't push yourself or Pikachu too hard. My mime. Don't worry, I won't. Be sure to change your. Got it, Mom. Ash flinched as he found out she'd still do that to him as a teenager. After this, he was completely out of the sights of his loving, if somewhat overprotective mother, who looked sad to see her only child leaving home. It was interesting, my dear. Delia jumped as the Pokémon professor spoke behind her, turning around to face him in a minor fluster. He somehow knew the perfect Pokémon for him on the first go, and somehow tamed a virtually untamable Pikachu with just a touch. It was quite remarkable. Well, you know, we Ketchums have always been good with connecting to Pokémon, Delia noted as Mimi spoke out in agreement. My mime. The question is, however, was that just natural talent? We both know that he has a potential he only previously demonstrated as a young child. I partially gave him a scholarship to the Pokémon summer camp to see if it would ever come forth again, yet it was only just now that I saw anything like it again. The question is, though, is it just an unconscious thing? My concern is more about who sees it, Delia mused in a dark sadness and worry. Route 1. After being along the route for long enough, Pikachu jumped off his shoulder and stared at him in confusion and plain déjà vu as Ash stopped in front of his old friend. Pika, Pikachu? Ash shrugged, it's complicated. See, do you remember reality sort of, imploding? Pikachu shook his head. Oh, then what do you remember last then? Pikachu proceeded to do an impression of a really angry gangster with a long jacket. The Pangoro and Pancham? Pikachu nodded. Oh, good then, that wasn't too long ago then. Ash started walking with Pikachu jogging alongside him as the semi-one-sided conversation continued. So, shortly after that incident, Cyrus. You remember him, right? Pikachu mimicked a face of emotionless loathing. Oh, you do then, good. Anyway, he figured out how to destroy reality as we knew it, and Arceus managed to pluck me out of the impending destruction to send me back with the mission to stop Cyrus. However, because of some issues reality didn't exactly come out the same way as before. Pikachu looked up and down him, as if making note of how tall he was now, Brock height at least. Pikachu hadn't seen Brock in long enough to really verify the exacts. Yes, me being older is one of them, and a few others now that I think about it. I actually kept in contact with Serena. Pikachu gave him a look that he couldn't describe, but he found it mildly unnerving, and, oh yes you do, sort of shipper look. Apparently the Pokédex actually has data on Pokémon not native to Kanto in it this time starting around. At that, he activated a random Pokédex entry to drive it home. Dunsparce, the land snake Pokémon. Dunsparce are avid diggers who use their drill-like tails to burrow under the ground. Why this Pokémon has wings is unknown to science, although there are cults who worship this Pokémon as the son of Arceus due to them. And I'm apparently smarter than a vast majority of people my age when it comes to Pokémon. Pikachu at that one stopped and just stared at him. Yeah, it's sort of hard to believe, but I apparently had to pass a 151-question test with a 90 or better to have started with Professor Oak and get a Pokédex, and that's about. Ash began to try and figure out how many questions he had to get correct. About 136, and other than myself, Gary was the only other one to do so I guess that makes me smart. Pikachu sighed and shook his head, in a similar way to an old person going on about how young people were going to doom the world. However, before Pikachu could mock the notion of an intelligent Ash, or Ash self-deprecate about it. Chirp! Ash and Pikachu were suddenly being swooped upon by a pair of Pidgey, who seemed to be determined to grab at the both of them with their extended and painful-looking talons. What's that about? We didn't even attack them? Ash questioned as Pikachu let loose sparks in its cheeks again as the Pidgey swooped at him again. Okay Pikachu, use Electro Ball. Pikachu nodded and began to gather electricity into its tail, which fizzled out to both of their shock as both birds tackled them in the chest, knocking them both to the ground as they flew up for another air raid and began coming back down. Try Iron Tail to block them. Pikachu nodded as he leapt up, sending energy into his tail, which didn't glow at all and thus had him get smacked in the face twice by the Pidgey and knocked to the ground as they flew around for a third attack. Ash was trying to figure out what was going on, before he had a crazy thought, Pikachu, Thundershock now. Pikachu stared at him like he just suggested to a human they crawl like a baby, but relented and let loose the weak electric attack, which actually worked and flew at the Pidgey. The two birds were hit, and after the shock promptly flew away as the two old friends dropped to their knees in shock. Going back in time may have brought back our memories, but all our moves are gone. We're back to where we started move-wise. Pikachu wailed into the sky about the loss of his hard work and promptly began to cry. A devastating realization later. A thundershock struck the similarly aggressive Rattata to the earlier Pidgey, which fled as the two old friends staked out a tree. Man, my head's still a mess so I can't figure out why the wild Pokémon are more aggressive this time around, Ash complained as he noted the dead and hollow tree in front of them, but I guess it's good for training at least, and I had just thought of something. Pikachu, just because you can't use your old attacks anymore. Ash stopped as he saw Pikachu hang his head in shame. It doesn't mean we can't train to use them again. We learned to use Iron Tail once, and we can do so again. He pointed at the dead tree. So let's start practicing. They stayed there for a few hours, oddly not encountering any more aggressive Pokémon, to which Ash got a mental answer to as to the cause of it. The territorial instincts of Pokémon were stronger in this timeline, and thus were prone to attack people who entered their territories if wild or tamed, and dealing with unfamiliar people as guard Pokémon. Mildly unsettling, but not too bad at least until they ran into wild Rhydon or Hydreigon, then it would SCK a lot. He also discovered the Pokédex constantly emitted a scanning signal that would take notes on any Pokémon a trainer was to come across. So, even though Ash did not need to have the Pokédex scan the attacking Rattata or Pidgey, it would still say on its own, this trainer has encountered Rattata and Pidgey along with Pikachu and Mr. Mime. Why did the Pokédex need to keep track of that anyway, considering that it was more of an encyclopedia than a research tool? His memories were still a jumbled mess in a lot of ways, so he wasn't sure why the idea of the Pokédex being able to use its encounter radar thing to catalog Pokémon health, strength, age, status of wild or tame, and other scientific curiosities in a non-invasive manner came to him as a possible answer. By this point, the light was starting to fade, and Pikachu had managed to partially regain use of Iron Tail, leaving a sizable crack in the dead tree, but nowhere near the same level of control Pikachu had after Rustboro. That's enough for now Pikachu, Ash told the mouse after it struck the tree again with an Iron Tail after 3 earlier attacks fizzled out. We should find shelter for the night. Pikachu looked around as if only realizing it was getting dark. We won't be getting to Viridian as fast as last time, but considering the last time we only got there that fast due to a flock of psychotic Spearow, I personally think the Torkoal beats the Bunnelby here. Caw! Both Ash and Pikachu froze in horror as the infamous bird call rang out from behind them, as they turned to see a huge flock of the red, black and brown Spearow, numbering in the hundreds, with about 10 Fearow, larger, brown birds with red crests, spearheading the mob. What did I do this time? Ash demanded in horror as both trainer and Pokémon did the only sensible thing and ran like the Dickens, the death flock pursuing them in murderous gusto. Somewhere ahead of the death swarm, about same time. A fishing line dangled in the fast-flowing stream, its owner sitting on top of a slippery rock with only the yellow upright duck Pokémon Psyduck to bear witness to her, said Duck sitting on another rock with a confused look on its face. Sigh? You know mistress, do you really expect anything to fall for a replica of yourself as bait? Seems more like a way to repel them without that spray stuff. Said mistress glared at the duck. She was about 15 like the earlier seen protagonist, with orange hair done up in a ponytail with a single green band. She was dressed in a pale yellow blouse and shorts with no undershirt. The clothes were old with visible age to them and a sizable bust that the blouse covered, but did not hide the depth and size thereof. Her limbs, and body in general, were gently tanned and well developed, like that of a professional swimmer, and tied to her back was a single sheath for a fishing pole, said pole being in the water. And its red and white bobber were where the girl's sea blue-green eyes were focused after finishing glaring at the duck. My special lure is perfectly capable of catching any water Pokémon. It caught you after all. Duck. No, I believe it was the donut that your lure got stuck in that I ate. Can I have another donut, Misty? I'm hungry. Misty promptly ignored the duck as the bobber vanished into the stream. Ha ha, she gloated to the duck as she pulled on the line with all her strength, as a shape was pulled out of the water, a large white and red fish. Goldeen, Goldeen, the Goldeen chimed as the duck looked worried. Sigh, why? The duck asked, which could be translated as, let me guess, I have to use scratch now. Or perhaps water gun, so I don't have to move and get washed away and probably drown. Misty smirked and said, oh no, this time around I'm doing it. She yanked the line towards her as the Goldeen looked ready to use a horn attack on her. Stop, Misty commanded the water Pokémon, whose eyes promptly seemed to lose focus, and the attack ceased as the fish Pokémon dangled in front of her. Goldeen. What is it you command, mistress? The still wild Pokémon chimed as if in someone's thrall. Duck? You know that is incredibly disturbing, correct? Misty frowned. Yeah, you're not the first person to call it that, she said sadly, but might as well have seen if I could actually do it. She reached for the single Pokeball she had on her. Now, I'm going to capture you now. You will not break out of this ball, understand? Goldeen Dean, which could be translated as, yes mistress. I will be yours forever. Misty threw the ball at the fish, which promptly energized Goldeen and captured it without hassle as she promptly posed, yeah, my sixth water Pokemon is mine. Sigh, the duck tilted its head as he pointed out, yes, and you still have over 100 more to catch to make your dream a reality. Why are you posing on a slippery rock, by the way? Seems like you want to fall into the... Misty promptly slipped into the fast-flowing river and was washed a few feet away before she yelled, waterfall. Water around her began to burst in the opposite direction of the current, allowing Misty to rapidly swim against the current and regain her rocky foothold, still with all 6 Pokeballs on her belt, including Psyduck's empty one. She promptly gave the duck a look. Why do I even keep you out of your ball anyway? The duck tilted its head. Sigh. Because you get lonely and I have an amazing personality? Misty huffed, though not denying her loneliness, and looked up at the dark sky. We better find a place to rest for the night. Caw. Caw. Ah? Some male voice screamed in the distance while a faint sound of electricity rang out. As Psyduck angled his head, Misty sighed in disinterest. Oh great, another human got himself into trouble with the local inbred Spearow flock again. Admittedly, with those birds, it was more or less someone breathing that would set them off in a rage. Psyduck? I'm getting a headache from all the noise. You always have one. She sighed, well, if I let the fool get mauled to death this place will be swarming with humans, might as well save the fool. Come on Psyduck. Psyyy, can you get me off this rock first, I can't swim. Misty sighed as she drew for Psyduck's ball. The human in peril. Pikachu, Thundershock. As the pair did the smart thing and ran for their lives, Pikachu glowed yellow and several streams of electricity flew from the fleeing mouse and struck several Spearow. All struck birds fell to the ground unable to battle or chase after Ash anymore, but the flock was hardly diminished. DMN it. Ash swore without realizing he even knew how to. What is their problem? Hoping to have any hint of what to do, Ash activated the Pokédex and scanned the bird Pokémon. Spearow, the tiny bird Pokémon. This highly territorial and aggressive Pokémon attacks those who anger it in huge swarms. They are known as the Carvanha of the sky for their ability to strip flesh from bone. Fearow, the beak Pokémon. Fearow are capable of continuous flight for over a week to pursue food and anything that irritates them. Fearow are known for being able to pierce airplane hulls with their beaks and kill approximately 20 humans a year. That didn't help at all. Ash complained as he shook the thing. Do you have any more information? Pokédexes in the old timeline did seem to have multiple entries that would be alternated every so often. One of them had to be helpful here. Spearow, the tiny bird Pokémon. While some populations of Spearow are purely vegetarian, the loss of plant diversity caused by human agriculture in the last 200 years has increased their tendency to devour meat in its entirety for their diet. Fearow, the beak Pokémon. Fearow were among the first flying-type Pokémon used by the military in the Middle Ages due to their beaks being able to easily get around chainmail armor and pierce the enemy's vital organs. Spearow, the tiny bird Pokémon. Spearow can only see in black and white, but it has an uncanny ability to find people. They have been used as both male birds, and by the Yakuza to find and kill people who won't pay their debt. Fearow, the beak Pokémon. Fearow accompanied Unovan pilot Charles Lindbergh on the first cross-ocean flight from Unova to Kalos. They are later believed to have mauled his infant son to death and ate what remained of his flesh when Lindbergh did not feed them for a week. Ash gave up trying to figure out anything and simply ordered Pikachu to keep spamming Thundershock until they were all knocked out. However, inbred or not, the flock still had enough intelligence to circle around the two and box them, trapped in the eye of a storm of ferocious birds. Ash and Pikachu ended up back to back, surrounded by birds on all sizes and degrees of murderous intent. So, I guess you shock and I just shield your back? Ash really couldn't do anything else at this point as the mouse nodded. And so the bird swarmed in a massive onslaught not even Alfred Hitchcock could have imagined. From one side, thundershock rang out, each bolt striking down at least 5 of the ferocious flying types. On the other, as a pair of Spearow came for Pikachu's back with Peck, Ash blocked it with his ever-trusty backpack, which somehow withstood the pecks without tearing. The repelled birds fell onto their backs on the ground, stunned due to their inbred lack of defense or HP. Meanwhile on the Pikachu side, a Fearow flew at Pikachu with a spinning beak. "Look out, it's a drill peck." Pikachu noted Ash's warning, and aimed all of his thundershock right at the bird. Well before it could even make contact, the bird's attack was stopped and it fell to the ground. However, even after the two of them had shocked off or repelled a decent chunk of the flock, there were still too many to take their place. As both trainer and Pokémon grew tired, a Fearow made a break for the kill blow as it folded up its wings and dived towards them like a missile. "Is that freaking drill run?" Ash exclaimed in horror as the ground-type attack flew closer and closer towards the exhausted Pikachu. While in the mouse's defense all the Spearow attacks probably helped it regain a lot of its lost experience points, he was still too exhausted to fire another electric blast. "No!" Ash exclaimed as he, in a blind desperation, got between the downed Pikachu and the incoming drill run from the head of the Deathflock. "I am not going to watch my friend die again." From a separate viewing angle to this Ash won. Misty and Psyduck, who had not been in range to hear the time travel-based remark, observed the situation with slightly concerned looks. Well, he fared better than the guy who started off with the Weedle, but he's still going to be killed. Misty was admittedly impressed the boy had lasted as long as he did. Most trainers who got stuck in that situation would have at least lost an ear by now. There was a reason why the Viridian officer Jenny often rode up and down Route 1, more than once a flamethrower courtesy of her Growlithe was necessary to spare a trainer's life. Still, she'd have to save him or people would come looking for him, and stumble upon her, and call them, and then she'd be blamed for absolutely no real reason when they blabbered out what she was. "Sigh? So, tell me again what we could actually do here? It's not like you have a Swampert with Stone Edge on hand or anything, and I would be useless." "Oh, I don't know, pecking causes headaches and headaches bring on psychic attacks, right Psyduck?" Misty sounded like she thought that was a good idea. "Duck Psyduck. Please don't, I want to live." Misty seemed to have decided not to do such a thing, and instead reached for one of her Goldeen Pokeballs, when the boy suddenly glowed in an orange outline. "Wait, that looks almost like counter." Misty trailed off as the drill run struck the boy head-on, as a huge burst of energy let forth from the boy and radiated into the flock. The huge burst of energy knocked out all the bird Pokémon, who promptly fell to the ground as the boy collapsed, a nasty-looking wound on his chest. The Pikachu looked just as stunned as Misty was. "Sigh? Wait, it's over? How gory is it? I don't like gory things." Misty ignored the duck as she walked, absolutely stunned, towards the now flying Death Swarm-free boy, as the Pikachu initially glared at her, then oddly enough stopped as if it recognized her. Misty had never even encountered a Pikachu before, so she couldn't understand why it would somehow look at her and not see a stranger. "I've never met another one like me before," she said to herself, seeing as the other person she was talking to was currently out cold. Taking out her old undershirt, she ripped it up and bound the wound as quickly as she could before she made a grab for the boy. "Well, better get you to Viridian City quickly to get that wound looked at." As soon as his hand touched her, however, a strange feeling came over her. It lasted for about half a minute, during which her Psyduck caught up to them and stared at the still shocked mouse. As the feeling left her, Misty shook her head and re-examined both man and mouse. They both seemed immensely familiar, yet she couldn't recall who they were, where she knew them from, or really any specifics. All she knew was, she could not let them die. And so the marathon run to Viridian City began, with a few Pokeballs being released as to allow a pair of star-shaped Pokémon, the brown 1-star Staryu and the purple, 2-star Starmie, with Starmie using Psychic to leviate the boy, and hasten the trip as much as possible, while Starmie used Water Gun at anything that looked like it would delay them. Misty only wished she knew why she felt she had to save this boy so badly. Viridian City Pokémon Center. In the year that Misty had been on her own, she had learned many street rules that she had to follow if she wanted to survive on her own due to her bloodline. One of the first she learned was that the Nurse Joys and Officer Jennys of the world were not a threat. While most private doctors or regular policemen, upon seeing anything vaguely reminiscent of a bloodline, would refuse aid or attempt to arrest her, the identical Soup family was different. No matter if she came in with the most bizarre of wounds, or had a witness statement that suggested she was underwater when it occurred, she was never ignored. Perhaps they had a really strong honor code about helping anyone in need and serving people equally. Misty had never asked. So, for the first person she had ever seen with a bloodline just like herself, there was no other place to go. Misty, hunched over in the waiting area of Viridian City, with nothing to do as the boy was being treated for his injuries but stare at the ancient image of legendary birds of Kanto, and Arcanine, known as the legendary Pokémon due to being the only aid to a legendary knight of Cameron Palace, in the remote Rhoda nation to the north of Pewter City, who with his faithful beast defeated the legendary birds who were under the control of a flying bloodline warlord. This knight would later train a squire named Aaron, that hung over the reception area, and ponder the question of the boy. Who was he? Why did she feel as though she knew him, yet she had no clear recall? Was that just some bloodline thing? She had never met another person like her before, after all, and any other bloodline user would feel oddly familiar to her, or was it something more? Grumble grumble. Misty's hunger derailed her train of thought instantly. There were many problems with having a bloodline in Misty's opinion, and one of them was a very strong metabolism. It would explain why the boy's backpack's food supply had been reduced to mere wrappers. Not that Misty was going to steal food from an injured boy or anything. Why? Ah, donuts, the hallmark of civilization. Misty's head rapidly turned to her right, where her Psyduck was gorging himself on a box of donuts, the box being mostly white with orange and purple trim. Hey, don't hog them all to yourself. Misty snapped as she tried to get a donut for herself. And found an empty box as the duck belched. Duck. Hey, you snooze, you loose. Oh, by the way, that was the last of the food in the Pokémon Center until tomorrow? Due to her bloodline, Misty could hear what water Pokémon were saying, as opposed to telepathically being told, but there were times she wished she didn't have to listen to certain water Pokémon talk. This was one of those times. In her annoyance at him, Misty looked ready to eat the annoying duck, but thankfully the duck was saved by the cop who spoke up behind the girl to be noticed. Misty. The girl stopped in her impulse to roast her Psyduck with the sheer heat of her rage as she turned to see the impeccably identical, blue-haired, and dressed Officer Jenny. The cop looked troubled. Yes, officer, she replied as the officer frowned. I really can't thank you enough for saving that young man. The Spearow flock on Route 1 were among the last of the hyper-aggressive Pokémon of old, at least according to the officer's mother, another Jenny, the one before her. Apparently, all Pokémon were that aggressive to humans if not caught before Professor Oak's research took effect. Ever since, Pokémon had become far less aggressive towards humanity. Most species now would only chase intruders out of their territories and would leave them alone if sufficient force was used. However, while I did find the area where the Spearow had attacked the poor boy, and it was quite clear that that is what had happened, the Spearow were all gone. Misty looked surprised to hear that. How was that possible? Those birds weren't going to go anywhere anytime soon. Team Rocket HQ. It was rare that Giovanni was happy after hearing about the trio of Jessie, James and Meowth, but today was one of those rare days. Normally, they would either annoy him with their cheerfulness, or they would be late on their Pokémon quotas, but this was a rare inversion of such irritations. After all, an entire flock of powerful flying-type Pokémon was a worthy additional to the Team Rocket arsenal after all, and there were enough of them so their debt was paid off, and would be for some time into the future. Of course, this just meant more time for them to mess up, but then again that was normal for them. The standard black business suit the man wore, bar its R insignia on the BRST pocket, with his black hair short on his head, made him all the more sinister looking as he gave a once-over to the white uniformed trio of a red-head, a blue-haired fellow and a talking Meowth, origin Giovanni design and no change for the trio as they were at the start. They looked nervous at his silence, and the Persian who sat by the Team Rocket leader seemed to enjoy the Meowth's misery. Giovanni decided to milk it for a bit more, slowly tapping his fingers and enjoying how they all seemed to flinch with each tap. Well done, he finally spoke as the trio seemed ready to burst into tears of joy at a rather simple bit of praise. A quick glare at them silenced them before they actually did so. The fact they seemed to be unnaturally loyal was one of the very few reasons he had not had them executed for their failures. Even if they were generally incompetent Nimrods, it always paid to have minions with undying loyalties to you in your criminal organization, as measures to deal with inevitable takeover attempts. Though with them, they were less enforcer material to take back power as disposable pawns who would sacrifice themselves while he begun his contingency plans. The fact that you have granted Team Rocket a substantial boon in our resources is commendable, but we are not finished yet. Not until Team Rocket is in full control of the world, and to do that, we will require many more Pokémon. So go forth and obtain some more. The often bumbling, yet at the same time occasionally efficient trio left his office in a hurry, muttering about going hunting in Viridian City or something of that nature. Viridian City. Giovanni mused of where his gym was located, though at the moment it was closed down for repairs. You know, my pet, I remember when I first went to Viridian City as a young, foolish trainer. It took me 3 days to get there, you know, the roads were horrible back then. The Pokémon Center. Opening his eyes for a moment, Ash could have sworn he saw the rainbow light of Ho-Oh flying overhead. That was due to happen roughly at. Hey, where was he? This wasn't a hill en route, the outdoors did not have a skylight. Pika Pie. Ash. Oh, thank Arceus you're alright? Ash blinked as he heard a voice alongside Pikachu's. It was familiar, yet he had no idea who it was. He quickly rose up, only then realizing he had been lying on a hospital cot and Pikachu was perched on the side table, tilting its head. Chew. Hey buddy, he looked around a few times, to find that the only other person in the room was Pikachu. Hey, who was that just earlier? Pie? There was someone else in this room. I heard him, and I could have sworn I knew him from somewhere. Ash trailed off as he got a better look around his hospital room. How exactly did we get here anyway? Pikachu Pie. I brought you here, a familiar voice spoke up as Ash saw a red-haired girl about his age staring at him from the doorway. Ash wasn't quite sure who she was, she looked familiar. Her voice, while changed by age, was still ringing more than enough bells to summon Ho-Oh, Lugia, and Giratina, who came just to shut them up after the sound crossed into its space. Now tell me, have we met before? You and your Pikachu seem familiar somehow. Before I have to pound it out of you. Ash just blinked. Misty? Ash really couldn't believe his eyes as he saw her. The short, angry, tomboyish girl just a bit older than him now was a tall, angry, tomboyish girl who actually looked like one of her sisters in body shape. Of course, even Ash had the sense to realize that comparing Misty to her sisters, no matter how you did it, was a way to be physically harmed. But she didn't seem to remember him fully. What was that? You will be able to restore memories, but not as perfectly and evenly as I'd had hoped to grant you. Arceus's words rang in Ash's ears as he recalled what was the problem. Oh, yeah, there was going to be no right way to do this. He could either lie and say he didn't know her, then Misty would leave and he'd never see his old friend again. If he said he did, she'd inquire how and he'd have to lie, be found out and slapped. If he told her he knew from an alternate timeline that he was pretty sure the Pokémon League had a sanity clause somewhere in its rules. However, he was saved from having to either lie, or sound insane, by the huge explosion up front. Up in the front of the Pokémon Center. Prepare for trouble, today we are on fire. Make it double, now listen up or earn our ire. Misty and Ash, who had managed to force himself out of bed due to the shock of the explosion, only just remembered it was at this Pokémon Center where he had first ran into Team Rocket. He had almost hoped they had simply not existed in this new timeline, but since when was luck ever on his side, as the bothersome THRSM posed right below a hole in the ceiling that had not been there previously. To protect the world from devastation. To unite all peoples within our nation. To denounce the evils of truth and love. To extend our reach to the stars above. Misty just stared at them in sheer confusion. Jessie, the redhead, looked the same as she always did. James, the blue-and-net guy, was likewise. It would seem they were the same. Of course, having said that, Meowth was going to end up being a Garchomp now. Team Rocket blasts off as the speed of light. Surrender now, or prepare to fight. Meowth, that's right. Thankfully Ash's worry was for naught, as the Scratch Cat Pokémon was exactly the same as he was once before. Misty just stared at them. Are you for real? She didn't even seem to be confused as much by Meowth being able to talk as them in general. We're more than real, James boasted, and we're here for every Pokémon in the Pokémon Center, but since we're nice we'll spare you all a few Caterpie so you can go train it up into a Butterfree, use it to capture more Pokémon, and then come back to steal those too. You steal Pokémon. Misty sounded just horrified. While Ash knew that the original Misty was opposed to the practice, but this Misty was beyond that. She sounded like a mother who was just told to eat her own newborn. The sheer disgust at the idea of Pokémon being stolen made Ash wonder why her distaste had become so much greater. Well, got to pay the bill somehow, little girl. Not all of us can survive merely by traveling the world after all. Now, hand over your Pokémon before. Go Stereo. Jessie was interrupted when the single-star Pokémon flew at her in a rapid spin and nailed her in the chest, sending the attractive red head right into the wall with a bang. Of course, Team Rocket had an uncanny ability to avoid being killed off a lot darker and edgier work that shoos off the clowns. Ow! How dare you hit me, you little brat, Ekans, go give her a taste of your bite attack. Coughing, tackle now. From each trainer let loose one of their original Pokémon, whatever did happen to them anyway? Ash had never found out. The purple snake Pokémon Ekans promptly bit down on Staryu while floating gas sack coughing slung itself towards Pikachu. Ash was going to order Pikachu to use Thundershock, but after what happened last time, well, Ash decided to err on the side of caution in case that this explosion actually might kill someone, or himself. Staryu, use Water Gun to blast it off. As Misty got in her non-violent attack option to blast the snake off her starfish, Ash called for Pikachu to use Iron Tail. The tail glowed a solid white. Pikachu swung it into the thing bag of air pollution successfully, causing it to fly back as the astonished James gaped at him. Ekans, Acid. Water Gun. The two female trainers' Pokémon exchanged range attacks, the two attacks colliding for equal power, while Meowth managed to get behind Pikachu. Quick, use Iron Tail. Pikachu's tail glowed white, but flickered out. Ha, looks like you're still working on that move, pal. Now let me show you a real move, Fury Swipes. Pikachu promptly unleashed a barrage of claw attacks on the mouse, before the poor cat suddenly was covered in electric static. Pikachu. Pikachu taunted the cat after flinching a bit from the stinging scratch attacks. Never use a multiple hit contact move on a Pokémon with static, cat. I envy Persians and their limber, Meowth muttered in his paralysis. Ash blinked, there was that voice again. Who did he keep hearing? It sounded really familiar. Coughing, Sludge Attack. Pikachu narrowly avoided a wad of the disgusting gunk that shot out the now recovered Coughing, who floated alongside James. You know, that Pikachu doesn't seem to be that bad. It might actually be worth something to the boss. Coughing, the poison gas Pokémon. Levitating in the air with its balloon-like body, Coughing are quite violent and explosive when exposed to heat or electricity. These explosions have a 40% mortality rate. Ash's Pokédex rang out from Ash's pocket on its own accord as James quickly looked at Coughing, then Pikachu, then panicked. Oh no! Get that horrible rodent away from my Coughing. Ash and Pikachu exchanged glanced, Pikachu smirking as he turned back to the two and let some sparks fly out of his cheeks. Both James and Coughing had looks of terror on their faces. Coughing, return, the nice Team Rocket member quickly recalled his Pokémon from the very real danger of the electric mouse as the two heroes smirked. Ha, now you can't hurt my Coughing. You will now surrender to our superior intel. Pikachu used Thundershock. A huge burst of electrical power flew from Pikachu right towards the Blueonette and the downed cat, who both promptly were shocked and began comically withering in pain. Jessie was knocked into the attack as well with her Ekans due to a swift attack from Staryu, getting caught in the attack just as the electricity caused them to explode. Thankfully for Ash's innocence, it was as it had always been, with the trio flying straight through the hole in the roof they had used to get in. What? How did a minuscule mouse pack that much power? James questioned as they flew away that somehow Ash could hear. Why did you call back Coughing, you dolt? Jessie grabbed James by the collar as Meowth shook his head. 'Cause he's more scared of losing it than you, but it looks like Team Rocket is blasting off most unusually. Twinkle. Nurse Joy and Psyduck poked their head up from behind the nurse's counter as Misty returned her Staryu, then the duck after she gave him an annoyed glare for hiding like that and leaving her to deal with Team Rocket. Oh, you beat Team Rocket? I thought the only way to get rid of them would be to get Officer Jenny here as quickly as possible. Now I feel like a fool, the nurse said before blushing as she flipped open the cell phone she had been holding. Maybe now I can avoid having to redo the tiles again. The doors to the Pokémon Center barely opened in time before a police mope burst through and skidded across the tiles before coming to a stop right in front of the nurse, who had an anime sweat drop. Or, maybe not. Removing her white helmet in a rush, the unchanged appearance of the Kanto Jenny, blue hair and uniform in all, looked around in confusion. Wait, where's the emergency? The officer questioned, looking around for anything obviously wrong before she looked up to see the hole in the ceiling. Oh, that probably has something to do with it. A trio of Team Rocket grunts broke in and tried to take over, but those two fought them off, Jenny explained as the officer noted the two teenagers. You did, huh? That was a great service to the entire community of Viridian. If there is anything I can do to thank you both for your grumble. Misty blushed as her stomach grumbled again as the Jenny lit up. Oh, you're hungry? Well, it may not be a key to the city, but I can get you a pizza. What's your favorite? Grumble. Ash blushed as he now sounded hungrier than Misty was. Okay, make that 2 pizzas. What toppings do you both want? Back at Team Rocket HQ, about 2 hours later. Most people have their vices. Some drink, some smoke and some watch shows about fat idiots, but Giovanni had a completely different sort of vice. He enjoyed watching those who fail get punished for it. Every time he saw one of his grunts get arrested, he chuckled. Whenever an engineer failed to properly construct a bomb, he shook his head in merriment as the poor fool blew up. In particular, he got a laugh whenever he found the trio of Jessie, James, and Meowth blow up. He had no idea how they didn't die. They were genetically normal humans, and Meowth, but it made them all the better to distract any usurpers if Proton or one of the other executives decided to try something. Standing over the crispy and twitchy forms of his minions, he reached down into Jessie's hair and removed a little clip-on device, a high-tech spy lens that also could detect certain informative tidbits of information, Pokémon levels, access government databases for identities and myriads of other things. Drawing and tablet device from a laptop bag hung over his shoulder, the Mafia Kingpin shook his head as he removed an SD card and info card from the camera and inserted both into his handheld device. So, what happened this time? Try to use a net on a Magmar again, he asked sardonically as he began to view the data from whatever wrecked his minions, and determine if he would have to chastise them for attacking too strong a target, or being beaten up by too weak of a target. However, as the data began to display itself, Giovanni's eyebrow rose up in surprise. It stayed that way for a few minutes, enough time for Jessie, James, and Meowth to recover from their crash landing and stare up at him. Boss. The well-dressed crime lord quickly tapped a few buttons, hiding a few statistics as he turned the tablet towards the trio, causing James to whimper about the coughing killer in the making. See this boy? The image on the tablet clearly showed Ash as the trio had first spotted him. As the trio nodded, James in slight terror, Giovanni continued, you are to follow him, monitor his skill level and report back to me on everything he does. Every captured Pokémon, every girl he kisses, what his goals are, you will keep me informed of everything this boy is and will be. No detail is too small. But boss. James whined before the most feared man in the underworld of more than 4 regions, Kanto, Johto, Orange Islands, and Sevii Icelands, glared back at him with a glare that could paralyze a Arbok. It in fact did paralyze them just long enough for him to replace the data cards into the spy camera, after downloading all the information it had gathered to his personal device of course. The trio was still none the wiser he was somehow monitoring them. We're on it boss. Come on you big crybaby. He's going to blow my coughing to bits and pieces. As Jessie and Meowth dragged the terrified Bluenet away, the head of one of the world's major crime syndicate seemed to be in his own world. So, it has finally begun, Giovanni said to himself. Entrance to Viridian Forest. Why exactly are you following me? When his original journey had begun, Misty hadn't exactly followed him for reasons of friendship. At least not at first. She wanted him to pay for her bike, which were unusually expensive for some reason that Ash had never quite understood for things so vulnerable to electricity, and gibble hunger pangs, which he had borrowed from her, and accidentally fried. Well, Pikachu did, but legally Pikachu could not purchase a bicycle in the old timeline, and in the new timeline there was no evidence to suggest that he could. This eventually turned into their friendship they had in the original timeline, which lasted even after her bike was finally restored after the Silver Conference. However, despite a lack of a crispy bike, she had followed him all the way to the entrance to the Viridian Forest itself, whose woody confines was preceded by several warning signs, beware beedrill hives, known lethal hazard, finding a Pikachu is not worth your life, Viridian Forest will not grant you superpowers, do not lick the tree sap, stay on the path to avoid damaging the forest and your hopes of reaching tomorrow. 251 days since last known fatality, made out of Weedle-proof metal. At least the fatality warning sign was reassuring. Her initial, I feel as though I know you somehow but have no idea how, couldn't be it, could it? There had to be something else. As the trainer with the perched Pikachu questioned the redhead, she held his gaze as she told him smartly, I have my reasons. I didn't accidentally destroy your bike, did I? He had to check to make sure. I never had a bike. The girl shook her head, wish I did, but I don't. I'd explain, but it's too open out here. I'll tell you in the forest, where we're less likely to be overheard. Misty's gaze briefly slid over towards a group of local Viridian trainers battling their Rattata and Pidgey off to the side of the forest entrance before, with some trepidation, she walked into the dark forest before them. Pikachu-pai, Pikachu-kachu. This reminds me of those shows the old man watches late at night with serial killers tricking victims to their bloody doom. The same unknown voice that Ash heard twice back in the Viridian Pokémon Center again sounded out in his head. You know buddy, I don't know if it's the 2 timelines in my head, which I still can't get straight. I can't remember who my father is in either timeline, nor can I recall what my elementary school was called except that it had a different name this time around, but I swear I keep hearing a somewhat familiar voice, and it just suggested that Misty is a serial killer. If that is the case, you wouldn't mind having back, would ya, buddy? Pika Pai Pai. Pikachu stated absently as Ash, now with a slight bit of concern, entered the forest, unaware of what his favorite furry friend was thinking. But I was the one who said that. Ash can't understand me, right? Ash didn't seem to hear that one though, unfortunately. Viridian Forest. Any thought of Misty being a serial killer who used Viridian as a dumping ground was quickly extinguished when she let out a girly scream and jumped 3 feet in the air as she rapidly backed away from a small green worm Pokémon, showing that her almost comedic fear of bug-type Pokémon was still quite intact as it approached her slowly. Yep, Misty was totally dangerous, Ash thought sarcastically. At the moment that Caterpie looked more intimidating than her, which at this rate would take maybe never to eat her. Caterpie, the worm Pokémon. Caterpie consume plant life at a rapid rate to allow for evolution to occur. It breaks down certain plant toxins to unleash a potent odor to repel predators. Ash's Pokédex rang out from his pocket. Pikachu sniffed the air a bit, before he hopped to the ground and rapidly pointed at the bug. Pika Pi. Pikachu Pi Chu Pi Pikachu. Ash tilted his head in confusion before Pikachu, looking annoyed at him, promptly shouted at him, Pika Pi. Pi Pikachu Pikachu Chu Pikachu Pi Cha. Oh come on, now you can't understand what I'm saying. That's our Caterpie currently terrifying Misty the not serial killer into near hysterics. Ash just stared at Pikachu in shock as he finally realized who that voice he kept hearing belonged to, but put it aside for the moment as he realized what Pikachu was originally intending. Okay then, Pikachu used Thundershock. A burst of electrical energy flew straight at the insect Pokémon and shocked it, causing paralysis and stopping its advance towards the terrified Misty. Saving her from certain. Possibly a hug. Pokeball go. Ash threw one of his original 6-ball at the insect, energizing him and sking him in as the ball fell to the ground and began to shake. After 3 shakes, white sparks were emitted from it as Caterpie was officially captured. As Ash picked up his ball and posed as he was prone to do with it with Pikachu, I caught a Caterpie. Pi Pikachu. Misty regained control of herself after a few, deep calming breaths. Oh, sorry about that. Misty blushed in embarrassment as she looked ready to slap herself. I had used the last of my repels on my first journey through this forest and forgot to get more before I went through again. I have a problem with bug types, and I was too freaked out to take out a normal counter to them. Before Ash could ask exactly what her counter for bugs were, she drew out one of her Pokeballs and tossed it, releasing a white and blue bird Pokémon. Wingull. The Wingull of all Pokémon promptly perched on Misty's shoulder and let out a cawing noise. Wingull the seagull Pokémon. Wingull are common in coastal areas, where they fly overhead and dive bomb their prey, which include small, non-Pokémon fish and any idiot eating French fries within 20 miles of the open ocean. Ash's Pokédex provided some information that may or not be necessary but was slightly amusing to imagine nonetheless. Misty seemed to fully regain her self-composure, more than any time he had seen Misty within the vicinity of wild bug types in the old timeline. Okay, now that we're alone, it's time to talk. See Ash, I'm not sure if you've realized this yet, but you're different from regular people. Ash briefly stared at Misty in shock, before jumping on what he thought she was going on. Wait, you know that I'm starting to understand Pikachu. What? You can't understand a Pikachu? Misty stated in a shocked tone of voice. What are you talking about? You just said I was different from regular? You should only be able to understand fighting types. Pika. Sylph Co., 11th floor. I now call the 40th annual meeting of the Pokémon Professor Association to order. Professor Oak, the chairman and one of 3 founders of the global group, spoke from the front of a long meeting table as many of the other highly regarded professors of the world, who could make it this year, representing various members of the Trainer-Aligned Treaty Organization, TATO, including Kanto, Professor Oak, the Orange Islands, Professor Ivy, Johto, Professor Elm, Hoenn, Professor Birch, or Professor Kane, Sinnoh, Professor Rowan, Unova, Professors Cedric and Aurea, Juniper, and Kalos, Professor Sycamore. Professors from members of the Fall City Pact, or Ranger Union as it was also known, such as Professor Hastings, were barred by TATO law from being members, just as it was illegal for any citizen of a TATO nation from going to, or even talking to anyone from, regions such as Fiori, Almia, or Oblivia due to the extensive Pokémon wars that had occurred for centuries between TATO member states and signatures of the Fall City Pact that had mostly settled down into a Cold War that had persisted for roughly 40 years or so, roughly around the time when Oak also was able to instigate the changes that would lead to the safer world of the present. The fact that Oak was old friends with Professor Hastings, and often collaborated with him in secret to better Pokémon kind, could easily lead to both of their executions if ever discovered unless they both managed to be granted asylum in a neutral third-party nation such as Rhoda. But, world-building facts aside, Before we begin, allow me first to welcome our two newest members, Professor Aurea Juniper of Unova, daughter of my fellow founder Professor Cedric Juniper, whose groundbreaking research into Pokémon origins is astounding to say the least. As the young woman got a round of applause from all present, including normally stoic fellow founder Professor Rowan, she blushed heavily, more so as her father slapped her on the back in good cheer, but nodded her head in acknowledgement. We must also give a warm round of applause to our first representative from OR, Professor Crane, whose research on the effect of the absence of Pokémon on humans makes me never want to go anywhere near or at all. Even the brown-haired Gadian Port native couldn't help but laugh at Professor Oak's joke as he also got a healthy round of applause. Now, before we get started on pleasantries, Rowan stated in his commonly serious tone, I do believe we must address something that we all are suffering from as of late, a recent string of budget cuts, am I not correct? As Professors Oak, Ivy, Elm and Birch nodded in agreement with Rowan, the rest shrugged. Nope, Cedric couldn't recall any difference in funds. I just got started, my budget's low but it was that way to begin with, Kane confirmed. I actually got a pay raise this year, Sycamore recalled his recent increase in funding. For some reason all the female senators and deputies were always willing to help him out. He now had a lab in Lumio City itself, where renting a single building cost more than renting half of Pyrite Town. Elm and Birch looked dejected as Rowan recomposed himself. Well, most of us suffered budget cuts as of late, and I do believe we all know the culprit in all this. At that, all the non-freshmen scowled. That fool Dr. Young, Birch said angrily as he slammed both of his hands into the desk with enough force to shake the entire table. The military seem to believe that his Mirage project is more important than Pokémon, it's disgusting. That fringe science is nothing but a money pit, all the while money that could be used to figuring out the habitat requirements for Gyarados to be satisfied, and not rampaging in human-inhabited areas, is unavailable. What do you expect? Bloodline hysteria has caused an unnerving trend towards militarism in all our nations, Professor Ivy pointed out as she shook her head. Sure, we need to take steps to deal with the threat that bloodliners present to humans and Pokémon alike, but not at the expense of Pokémon. Dealing with the threat is not the term I'd use, Professor Oak said with a bit of steel in his voice, rather, I'd be more interested in finding out more about them first. I'm sure we could, as they enslave us all and take over the earth, Elm muttered to himself, but loud enough for all to hear. Perhaps less researching them as a race or species, and more research aimed into finding out why there are more of them in recent memory than in the past, Cedric Juniper suggested. Starting roughly 16 years ago, the number of bloodliners in the world has multiplied drastically. Where once there used to be maybe 10 in Unova at the most since even before the birth of Resharam and Zekrom, now there are thousands, with a vastly female majority. Similar changes in numbers have occurred all over the world, all in the same time frame and gender scale. What has caused this drastic change? I'd certainly like to know, Aurea Juniper thought out loud. I wrote my thesis paper on the origins of the Trubbish evolutionary line, and bloodliners are in between Pokémon and humanity after all. As interesting and groundbreaking as that research would undoubtedly be, I would advise against it, young lady, Rowan told her with a gruff sort of caution in his voice. Politicians have a nasty habit of cherry-picking your research to justify heinous things you never intended your research to be used for. They also have an unpleasant tendency to ignore anything that they don't want to be there. Just ask Professor Oak about how it was when he was trying to publicize his findings on the causes of Pokémon on human aggression, right, Professor? Professor Oak seemed to be deep in thought, which Rowan interrupted with a gruff cough. Sheepishly he came out of his thoughts enough to remember what she had actually asked him. Yes. Believe me, you wouldn't believe the death threats I got, and even still get today. Oak joked about it as his mind attempted to get back on track of his previous thought. How to go about researching bloodlines, starting of course with the bloodliner, one of many terms used to describe them, who had just left his lab with a Pikachu. Deep in the Viridian Forest, closer to Pewter City. I think we missed him, perhaps we should get out. James suggested. Quiet. Jessie snapped at her partner in crime as they held vigil in a little stand up top a non-kakuna-studded tree, which lay in perfect observation of the main path out of the Viridian Forest. From what they had managed to gather, their target had left Viridian City and was heading north to Pewter City. He was registered to compete in the Kanto League after all, and with Viridian's gym currently closed, Giovanni was removing asbestos that had been installed by his predecessor and mother Madam Boss. Pewter City was the closest gym the boy could go to. We could be here for days though, can't we at least go back to Pewter City when it gets dark and get a portable DVD player or something? James suggested. That sounded like a pretty good idea at the moment. Certainly better than sitting around in a tree with nothing to do. The boss gave us a direct order, and we will man this post until the target passes by. Zzzztt. A loud burst of electrical energy exploded about a quarter mile into the forest center, silenced both grunts as Meowth popped his head up from ground level, holding a white plastic bag filled with sub-sandwiches with one of Team Rocket's human disguises that only Froakie could see through, making him resemble a midget. You clowns better like eating and running. I think we just found our target. With Ash and Misty. You shouldn't be able to understand Pikachu, it's not a fighting type, Misty reiterated as Ash just gave her a confused stare. Why would you think I should only be able to understand fighting types? Wingle. The birds' loud calls briefly took their attention as a swarm of territorial Beedrill came out of the trees around them in a huge swarm. Misty briefly looked terrified, before she decided to take advantage of the situation to give a demonstration before Ash would say the customary "you must be crazy, think I'm stupid" on something line. Whirlpool. Wingull flew off of Misty's shoulders as Ash and Pikachu gaped at her in shock as Misty briefly glowed white, raising her right hand high into the air before a huge, swirling vortex of water was held over her head. The move that Dawn's Piplup had used to win many a contest had been created by a human, and was now catching the Beedrill in its watery confines. With a ferocious yell, Misty sent the attack flying overhead, the water attack losing cohesion after about 30 seconds of flight and caused the bug types to fall to the ground in a heap quite a distance away. I know you're different, Ash, because you used counter when you were attacked by the Route 1 flock of homicidal Spearow, she stated as if what she had just done was a trivial matter. I did. Ash said, utterly surprised. Pikachu. I was as surprised as you were. Ash turned to his mouse companion and demanded, then why didn't you tell me? That little detail might have been important to know. Pikachu pie. Ash and Pikachu simultaneously looked annoyed at the fact that for some reason Ash couldn't consistently hear what Pikachu was actually saying. Is it normal to only hear half of what your Pokémon is saying in your head? Ash questioned Misty, who looked confused. What, do you mean telepathically? When I hear my Pokémon, it's just like regular speech, Misty answered, looking pensive. Then again, for all I know this is normal. I've never met someone like me before, maybe the rules are different with each bloodline, I'd have to think about it a bit. Blood what? With Team Rocket. Stealthily the two agents and their Meowth hid behind a pair of trees, poking their heads out into the clearing where the electrical blast had come from. You know, I don't think this is the coughing killer's work, James noted as he surveyed the damage to the clearing. It was clearly the place of a Pokémon battle after all, though in addition to electrical burns on the sides of trees, regular burns were scattered around and damp patches were everywhere, probably the fault of the fainted Squirtle lying on its back in the center of the clearing. Its trainer was sitting on the ground in front of it, looking despondent. He had brown hair, done up all spike-like, and was dressed in blue with bluish-black pants. He was around the same age as the kid they were pursuing. For all we know, the boss wants him because he can summon Ho-Oh to do his bidding. Now shut up. I lost, the kid muttered to himself in utter shock as the TR trio exchanged glances with one another, non-verbally coming up with a plan to question the kid. 5 minutes later, as the boy finally returned his Squirtle to its ball and began walking towards Pewter City, still in a slight daze, the trio jumped out in front of him, disguised with their shirts turned inside out and Meowth sitting by their feet akin to a regular Meowth. Why, don't you look down in the dumps? James kindly asked the boy, who averted his gaze. Leave me alone, the boy muttered as Jessie jumped in. Aren't you all down in the dumps today? Did you lose something? The boy gritted his teeth, but responded, yeah, I lost a battle. Some JRK with a Pikachu and AC. The TR trio exchanged urgent, if terrified from James, glances before pressing. Say, this Pikachu trainer didn't have a blue jacket, a official Pokemon League hat. As they asked this, Gary suddenly burst into laughter. Wait, are you trying to describe Ashy Boy? Like hell would I ever lose to him. Thanks though, I needed a laugh. Now, I'm off to Pewter City for a gym battle. He got about an 1/8 of a mile down the path before the TR trio, who were internally wondering why there was another Pikachu trainer running about, recalled that he was prime for a Pokemon poaching and promptly ran after him. Prepare for trouble. Buzz. A swarm of the giant bee Pokemon Beedrill descended around them before Gary could hear their motto, disturbed by TR's loud racket. Well, I guess we have to prepare for trouble, Meowth gulped as Coughing and Ekans went out to protect their masters. Later that night, a desperate need to consume sustenance later confirmed that one rule at least was in common for people like Misty and himself, or as Misty called it, those with bloodlines. As Misty seemed confused why what he was able to do differed from how it worked with her, she had no answers, and it wasn't worth asking her now. Not only was there no way in hell that Misty was going to make any sort of noise in the dark of night in an area home to known Ariados nests. Apparently, some Johto Pokémon could be found west of MT Moon, but in low numbers, but she was also fast asleep in her own sleeping bag on the other side of the campfire as Ash silently prayed that Misty's sleep cycle was the same as he reached for Caterpie's Pokeball, using the inside of his sleeping bag to muffle the noise of the released Caterpie, Pikachu's own ears perking up as he heard it. Ash placed a finger on Caterpie's crest, causing the bug to lose the apprehension in its eyes as he regained all his lost memories. Placing 2 fingers on each of his temples, Ash stared intently at Caterpie. Caterpie, I am speaking to you telepathically. Do you understand me? The bug just stared at him before making a few bug-wheezy noises. Pikachu, why is Ash doing a Patrick Stewart impression? For that matter, why am I a Caterpie again? Last thing I remember I was flying around north of the Kalos region. Now I'm back where I was born again. And somehow Ash can apparently comprehend what we're saying in full. The mouse, who had squirmed in deeper into the bag, swatted Ash in the nose to stop him from attempting telepathy from his end of the conversation. Pikachu Chapai. It's sort of complicated, with time travel distorting space and the end of all reality to prevent from reoccurring, that sort of thing. And who's Patrick Stewart? Caterpie seemed to be unamused as he made a few more noises. The author has no idea how to type, so basically, the space-time continuum has been broken and time reset, and it's our job to keep it from breaking in the first place? Pi? Spacetime wa. Ash continued to try and focus as he told them rather upbeat, hey, I'm actually starting to get the hang of this. I just need to focus on it. Chuka Paikacha. Just don't try to figure out poke language to a point you don't need it. Humans cannot comprehend the 500,000 basic rules to it without getting to the semi-complicated ones, mildly complicated, rather complicated and unwholly complicated ones. Caterpie crawled his way up to the top of the sleeping bag to stare up at the moon as he was prone to do in the original timeline, commenting, regardless of the fact that the space-time continuum may be in danger of shattering for a second time, it might not be so bad to restart everything again. It was a lot of fun training with you in the original timeline back when you were a rookie. At least I assume you weren't a rookie when the original timeline ended. That and maybe I can avoid a few bad calls with my mate that put me in the Growlithe house, so to speak. Ash looked insulted as he replied, oh come on, I'm not that bad. I won the Orange League and Battle Frontier, got into the top 16 in the Indigo Conference, top 8 in the Silver, Evergrande and Virtus Conferences and the top 4 in the Lily of the Valley Conference. Still wish I won though. Pikachu. You know Ash, all the trainers who won the conferences, John Dixon, Tyson, Tobias, Virgil were at least considering you were. Pikachu drew a blank at how old Ash was. Oh come on Pikachu, you know I was. Ash also drew a blank on exactly how old he was. Stupid temporal distortion Cyrus being in butt. Pika Pikachu. Well I'm pretty sure you were not that old. For however old you were, an average of the top 8 is quite an accomplishment. Even if at times you made questionable calls, you've gotten better over time. Look at how you learned how to better use flying types after Hoenn and how you managed to make full use of bug types in Unova, not to mention you were able to maintain a team of 10 Pokemon in rotation for the first time. I still lost in Unova, and went down a seat. Ash seemed to be somewhat prone to depression about his past actions. Chew. Yeah, that's Professor Juniper's fault. Caterpie and Ash stared at Pikachu in confusion as Caterpie asked, there's more than one professor? Pikachu, why would you blame her? For all I know I was eternally 10, and I'm more mature than that. Pika Kacha Ash, what is the difference between Professor Juniper's lab and Professor Oak's? Professor Oak's has an expansive outdoor area where Pokemon are let loose to continuously train themselves as we are warned to do. He even helps out in doing so to better study Pokemon-human relations. Professor Juniper does not have this, instead the Pokemon you kept in rotation at her lab were kept in their Pokeballs in stasis. Had you had the ability to reliably send your Unova Pokemon to Kanto for rotation, you could have possibly have won Unova. It might have worked out more to your favor if you fully rotated your team, but considering how I'm pretty sure you lost my Pokeball at some point and Pignite had abandonment issues that could have really negatively affected him if you swapped him out until he got over it after the Team Plasma thing, but still it was the right idea, but perhaps the wrong time to implement it. Ash thought about that for a moment. That did make some level of sense. After all, he didn't teach Noctowl Air Slash, Heracross Sleep Talk, Torkoal Heat Wave or Snorlax Ice Punch. They learned those moves at Oak's lab. Still, he didn't believe that it was right to blame Professor Juniper for every loss in Unova after all. I'm sure I must have done something wrong. I mean, perhaps I should have seen if it was possible to carry more than 6 Pokemon or something. Caterpie shook his head and told him, after I left Ash, I've traveled across the world. At no point did I ever see a trainer allowed to train more than 6 Pokemon while on the move. If you were in a fixed place, like a gym or Oaks lab, you could have more than 6 Pokémon active, but once you leave the confines, having over 6 goes against international law, but who knows, maybe that is different in this new timeline. The Pokédex might have something on it though. Ash curiously decided to check this, after lowering the volume of course. Pokémon trainers are allowed to carry a maximum of 6 Pokémon on them at any given time outside of specifically allowed areas with Pokeball limit jammers. This number has in the past been higher or lower based on the cost of Pokémon food, trends of battling and wild Pokémon, as well as human hostility. The 6 Pokémon limit of modern times was implemented 40 years ago by Professor Samuel Oak in part after the near-leveling of coastal Johto by infamous outlaw 20 Garridos Bill. Guess not. 20 Garridos Bill? Caterpie was both amused and terrified by the name. Makes me wish I was known as 20 Charizard Ash, Ash commented before he thought about some of the disobedience issues his Charizard had had. On second thought maybe that might not be such a good idea. The next day. Contrary to what it may appear, Ash did not abandon his Pidgeot. During his time in the Orange Islands, Route 1 was affected by construction, which caused habitat disruption. This, coupled with the environmental chaos caused by a overzealous collector trying to capture the original Articuno, Zapdos and Moltres, resulted in the flock migrating elsewhere. Ash cried himself to sleep the night he found a familiar feather left in his window as a parting gift. Thus, at the first spotting of the as-of-now Pidgeotto he had caught prior, quickly confirmed by the scent-detecting skills of Pikachu the Wonder Mouse, just as Ash and Misty finished off a box of Pop-Tarts each and their released Pokémon, Pikachu, Caterpie, Wingull and, on his own will, Psyduck, were dealing with another round of Pokémon food. Capture was an immediate must as the bird landed on the ground on the other side of the little clearing they stopped for the night in to peck at worms in the ground, before noticing them and glaring. Pidgeotto, the bird Pokémon middle evolution of the Kanto Johto region. It constructs its nests in the center of their large territories, held by various migrating flocks of this Pokémon and its evolution and pre-evolution Pidgeot and Pidgey. Pidgeotto are loyal and determined creatures, but will use vicious force to defend themselves and those in their flock. Ash's Pokédex recorded another Pokémon scene as Ash and his Pokémon immediately disengaged from eating. Misty noted his interest and asked, "You want to catch it?" Ash nodded before he gave a glance to Caterpie. As much as Ash would prefer to possibly do this the easy way and just touch them and regain their memories, there was the problem of touching a wild Pokémon that could fly, and also to a somewhat dangerous one. So thus, violence was necessary, but with Pokémon battle honor and all Pidgeotto should forgive him. Use string shot to prevent Pidgeotto from flying off. Caterpie obliged with a blast of threads from its mouth, though Ash didn't hear anything from him. Perhaps it was just his eagerness to get one of his old friends back messing with his concentration or something, which promptly restrained Pidgeotto from flying off by binding its right foot. The bird gave an annoyed look at the bug that was restraining it, yet also a confused one, in the sort of, why is the prey preventing the predator from flying away and leaving it alone sort of look, to which it responded by flying downwards at Caterpie in a quick attack. Meet it head-on with tackle. The two charging attacks met head-on, but it seemed quick attack was faster, causing the now airborne Caterpie to swing backwards. Now, use the string shot to sling yourself around and tackle it again. The string shot still attached to Pidgeotto's leg, the bug type took the energy from the tackle quick attack collision to speed itself around and above the now startled flying type. The tackle was a critical hit, causing Pidgeotto to crash down into the dirt as Caterpie landed right next to it. Similar to the old timeline, that fall would have killed, or severely injured, a human, but the Pokémon were perfectly fine. Pidgeotto wasn't going anywhere without a potion though. Ash promptly threw the Pokeball, which energized the downed bird and caught it with no hassle after the third shake. Misty rose an eyebrow in surprise at his capture. "Are you sure you're a rookie trainer? That was pretty good." He just shrugged his shoulders and told her, "Guess I'm just a natural." When he sent out Caterpie, she was promptly ready to give him a lecture about typing once he was forced to return Caterpie. She had no idea that was actually legitimately planned. Ash, Pikachu, Caterpie and Psyduck each gave their own version of a nervous laugh, the former for being time travelers and the latter because Misty would now expect him to be that awesome. However, before Misty could press on about the origin of the laughs, Caterpie promptly glowed in the well-known light of evolution. A day later, with TR. "This isn't the chicken and bacon ranch melt Meowth. I told you I wanted a chicken and bacon ranch melt after 2 straight days of meatball marinara, not the roasted chicken. What do you take me for, rich boy, a cat that can make money out of thin air? Those things cost more than your fancy bottle cap cases. You're a Meowth. Your signature move is payday and we're members of a criminal organization. Yes, but do you think that a government in Kanto could last if they didn't have the ability to control Meowth Financial? Silence, we have to take notes, the kids battling some samurai wannabe. Jessie hushed them both as they observed the battle that was about to go down. Trainer from Pallet, your compatriot has dishonored me in combat and after combat with his dishonorable behavior. As his townsmate, you shall pay for his dishonor. Sure? Ash didn't think he was this high-strung last time. Now, go Pinsir. Avenge my honor. In a flash of white light, the huge, brown beetle Pokémon with its large, steel-gray crushing pincers on its head glared down at Ash with a metallic clash of its crushing claws. He was about to get out his Pokédex for more information on it, but it beat him to it. Pinsir, the stag beetle Pokémon. Pinsir are well known for their feud with Scyther and Heracross for forest territory. Using its pincers, this Pokémon can snap flagpoles in half. Ash's Pokédex rang out from his pocket. Metapod, go! Ash threw his own ball, releasing the green cocoon Pokémon that had evolved from his Caterpie after the successful capture of his Pidgeotto. Metapod, the cocoon Pokémon. While this Pokémon usually does not eat or move, a trained Metapod is capable of everything a Caterpie can do. A wild-caught Metapod, or one trained by a complete rookie, is incapable of anything. Despite this, it is the icon of Playtrainer magazine. What kind of messed up people or Pokémon? Ash just removed the Pokédex from his pocket with a confused look as he asked it, do you have to randomly give out information like that? Yes, the Pokédex stated before Ash repocketed it. His opponent yelled at him and said, just like that Pokédex, you are a fool, and shall be dealt with as one. Pinsir, Vice Grip. The huge, imposing bug type loomed over the green bug cocoon, his pincers clicking together ominously like rusty shears as Metapod looked vaguely alarmed. Use String Shot. The Metapod released a gush of string from below its eyes, where one would assume it once had a mouth, which bound the pincers together and caused both Scary Bug type and Samurai Trainer to freeze in panic. Impossible. A Metapod cannot use any attack that is not hardened. As if to doubly prove this thinking false, Ash had Metapod use another attack. Now, tackle. Metapod proved it retained its other attack as well, with a solid move into Pinsir's face. The attack caused the much larger bug type to stumble back, before tripping over and fainting. What? You dishonor me with your treachery. That is simply a Caterpie in Metapod's clothing, is it not? No, it's a Metapod I trained from a Caterpie, Ash asserted in an annoyed tone as the samurai recalled the downed Pinsir. You shall be punished, go Metapod. The samurai's own Metapod appeared before him as Ash returned his own Metapod and threw out another Pokeball, releasing Pidgeotto. Allow me to show you a true Metapod, Harden. Gust. Contrary to what was once taught to Pokemon trainers in the Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn regions, what attack stat a move was based on was not based on the type of attack, but the attack itself. So, despite what was once taught, Gust was a special attack, not a physical attack. So, when the flying attack hit the better defensive power of the Metapod, all Harden did for it was to make it hurt more when the Metapod was blown right into the samurai, who was blown along with his Metapod into the sky. There was even a Team Rocket-esque twinkle to announce that he was well and truly gone. Ash and his companion blinked in confusion about how easy that was. Wow, I guess all that battling for our lives against that swarm of Beedrill was good for more than just perfecting Pikachu's Iron Tail, huh Pidgeotto? Ash muttered to himself. Ash? Misty asked him as she pointed over at Metapod. He turned to look as to his surprise he saw a glow already surrounding his bug Pokemon. Metapod's evolving! Ash exclaimed delightedly. He watched as his old Pokemon became a Butterfree again, gaining large white wings and attaining a more purple middle with large red eyes and the iconic black markings of a male Butterfree. Once Metapod was done becoming well and truly a Butterfree, Butterfree stretched out its wings in triumph as it flew around. Free! Meanwhile Team Rocket was watching him and making a verbal report on what they'd seen. Okay, trainer whose name we are pretty sure is named Ash. Stalking Report Volume 1, Trainer in Forest with Red Head Water-type Trainer female. Trainer has captured and trained a Butterfree, Pidgeotto, and has apparently perfected Pikachu's Iron Tail attack. Victorious battle with Bug-type Samurai Trainer and now on the move north to Pewter City. Stalking shall continue, send more sandwich money. Jessie verbally recorded the information to be sent to Giovanni while Meowth and James continued to argue about sandwiches, missing the latter part of the conversation visible to only Ash's perspective. Free. I so did miss being able to fly around, and look at my beautiful wings, his Butterfree said in delight. As he looked at his newly evolved Pokemon, he had to agree with Butterfree there. Now, to Pewter City, and away from this forest. Misty seemed too happy to leave. Oh make. Canon relativity to reset universe, not canon. Welcome to the AKA Crossoverpairinglover Studios. Today is the day. Hey, you're stealing my line. Ash, back in his 10-year-old form as seen in the original series, with Pikachu at his side, was standing within a see-through elevator going up the sides of a large building deep within a large city. Next to him was a redhead dressed in a yellow bodysuit with a lightning bolt symbol on his chest. So, you're Quicksilver, right? The redhead turned to Ash with an annoyed look and stared at him as he questioned, "Do I look like an irritable mutant who jumps ship from hero to villain like it's hopscotch? I'm Kid Flash." "Oh, sorry. So, somewhat idiotic anime character, how are you enjoying your recent promotion to the top of the studio? You're now one of the front-running stories, and the only one really active now. The future of us all rides on your shoulders." Ash blushed as he urged, "No need to put so much pressure on me. I have to. Here at this studio, we've done all sorts of stories, starring blonde ninjas, boys who lived and seaweed-brained demigods, along with yours truly. Didn't you co-star? Please use present tense, I am just in hiatus. Of course, that means you're going to have to cover all the OMACs. OMACs? Shouldn't you know what they are? You're an anime character? That's a stereotype. Pika. One of the original sidekicks just shrugged and said, "Well, you're more likely to be shown doing something comedic than Batman or Goliath. Well, anyway, basically you're going to have to be ready for anything. You could cross over across any fandom the author likes. Pika. As long as I don't end up a card in some pharaoh's deck or start sparkling, I'm fine with anything. Yeah, and I'd better not be finding out the leader of Team Rocket is actually my father, Darth Vader." Ash commented. You could be used to show off some random fact the author found out as he was writing the chapter. Iran teaches evolution to all its students and has no religious problem with it. There are roughly 12,000 species of fern in the world. Jarvis is Vision's voice actor in Avengers 2. J.K. Rowling is now a Harmonian. As the loud and imposing voice showed off this point, Kid finished. I know Naruto ended up involved with Pleistocene rewilding in his last project, among other things, Plestiwa. You could even show off a challenge the author coughs up that he hopes a reader will take on. Hopefully you won't be used to vent out the author's political views, it offends too many fans. The big guy is working on it, but sometimes he just has a bad day. Beep. The elevator reached the top floor, silencing the kid hero as the three prepared to exit the elevator. Omake or not, Ash, be ready to have fun with it, and remember, you only have one shot. The author has proven he can only do a well-liked story in a fandom once, ignoring that side project he did in a different section of your fandom. If you mess this up, you're never going to get another chance. Now, I'm off to get that free ramen before that ninja beats me to it. As Kid sped off into the exclusive "Your Story is a Top Priority 1 VIP penthouse floor," Ash and Pikachu sighed. "Well, Pikachu, I guess we have to take this one step at a time. Let's just try to get to 100 reviews and see if we can make it. I mean, we already have 44 with 3 chapters, I'm sure we'll be number 1 at this studio before we know it. You have to overcome the other stories first, and you're barely halfway to the next milestone." Dobe, a duck-haired anime character, rudely told Ash before walking away to brood some more. Of course, even if you beat Olympus Divided and Moon Air 2 right after it, to best the next highest reviewed story, next gen, you'd need over 250 more reviews. You'd need nearly 2,000 reviews to take Mysterious Power's crown at the top. You should give up now, Dobe. Maybe we can get some Esper to terrify the readers into reviewing more, Ash suggested as he and Pikachu promptly fell into a depression. Entrance to Pewter City. So, you plan to enter the Indigo Conference, win all 8 badges and all. Misty spoke in a tone that was both conversational and questioning as the two walked down the hills into the valley Pewter was located in. Yep. And I'm taking it you plan to challenge the gym leader of Pewter City? Pikachu Pie. Preferably without that will thing again, me being squeezed to death roughly twice and having to win by sprinkler ex machina. Ash internally flinched at being reminded of how some of his earliest victories were somewhat less victory and more reward. That, and he hated to win because of unfair circumstances. He still felt bad about Mauville Gym supercharging Pikachu during his battle with Watson. Cheating, directly or not, was something that Ash could not stand in anyone, particularly himself. That's the plan. Not much else to see in Pewter if you're not a geologist or astrologist. Misty nodded and said, "You know that rock types are super effective against flying and bug type Pokémon, and that most of the ones in Kanto are also part ground type, so you can't just shock them to defeat them. Pi? We could just aim for a horn and hope for the best." Ash thought about how that had happened, and decided that he should not rely on that this time around. Considering how Pokémon seemed to actually be somewhat different, more aggressive for one thing, in this new timeline, Ash had the oddest idea he couldn't use Gainax logic to overrule physics with willpower and awesomeness. Well, Pikachu perfected Iron Tail while we were in the forest. Ash pointed out as Misty shivered involuntarily at the memory of being in said forest. Steel beats rock. You know, I was wondering why you taught it Iron Tail. Wouldn't Brick Break do the same thing but with more versatility? Pikachu can learn Brick Break? The mouse on his shoulder shrugged, having no idea if he could learn it. Iron Tail would still work, and maybe you just want to make sure Pikachu can have a move capable of hurting a Ghost Ground type, but to each his own I guess, Misty commented as she shrugged. You know, this actually works out well. She had a thoughtful look as Ash and Pikachu ped their heads in confusion at her. I want to check a few things out while we're here, and if they pan out they should come out nicely. At no point as they went into the city while Misty was pondering plans or discussing the logic of Iron Tail over Brick Break, did they encounter a rock salesman. Which was a real shame not only for getting to possibly meet Brock's father but also because Ash had been looking forward to starting a rock collection that he would have to lug all over the world and would be entirely useless to him. Well, maybe at least Gary was that stupid and already bought all the rocks. Doubtful, but hey, a guy could dream. Gate of Pewter City. Ash had come to accept that time travel had caused several disruptions in time, ranging from people's ages to, as he recalled from his still hazy sets of memories, more wars. However, it was quite obvious that there were more changes yet, and he hadn't expected this one. A familiar figure was waiting up front at the gate, a large, muscular man with a large round nose, huge mustache and dressed in a karate-esque uniform. I am Don George, of the Pewter City Battle Club. I take it you're a trainer here to challenge Brock, the Pewter City gym leader? Don George, the Battle Club manager family from Unova. Was now in Kanto. Of all the possible. Ash would have expected Brock to become a woman before something like that. Which would admittedly be seriously awkward and wrong but would evoke the question, would Brock then be boy crazy? Ash managed to absently nod through his confusion and shock, while Misty shook her head. I'm just traveling with him, I don't have any interest in the Pokemon League challenge. Well then, you're going to have to come with me, young man, and why not you as well, miss? Pewter City Battle Club. Iris had said before about the Battle Club, that it was an awesome place for trainers to sharpen their skills, or something along those lines, about the battle clubs of the old timeline, and these ones didn't seem to differ from that. The educational lecture part. Was different, as Ash found himself in a room with roughly a dozen plus other trainers around his age, as Don George stood in front of them, more like something out of a school than a battle facility. Each and every one of you has come to Pewter City for the purpose of challenging Brock, the leader of the Pewter City Gym. Don George spoke in front of the class, a noble first step for many of you in your journey to the Pokemon League Championships at the Indigo Plateau. However, at this point I must ask. How many of you are not from either the Pewter, Viridian, or Pallet areas? Only 4 hands went up. And of that, how many of you are from anywhere east of Mount Moon? The hands dropped. As I suspected, so allow me to be straight with you. The Pokemon found within this area are not known for their general ability to fight Brock's Rock-type Pokemon. Allow me to use video demonstrations to explain what used to happen before you were all required to attend this seminar. The room darkened as the sound of technology activating preceded the projector's activation, revealing a video footage of a gym battle, with Brock, who looked older, but no more so than 20 if Ash had to guess, once again commanding his Onix, with a young trainer's Pidgey bravely staring it down. Swat. Before being whacked by Onix's tail and KO'd. Similar scenes were shown with Onix easily defeating a Caterpie, Weedle, Rattata, Spearow, Ekans, Jigglypuff and Metapod, then a few scenes that initially brought up the non-Ashes in the room's hopes, but quickly squashed them when a Beedrill, Paras, Mankey and Sandshrew were similarly swatted. You cannot just bring in a poorly matched Pokemon, or even a correctly matched one you just caught, into a gym battle. You must train your Pokemon before you battle them. It's in bad taste to use a Pokemon just for a specific battle and never use it again. As Pokemon trainers, you have a long journey ahead of you. There are many paths to take, and there is no correct way to go about it, though there are wrong paths. It's equally as professional to use the same team of Pokemon again and again as it is to occasionally start from scratch in a new region or a mixture of these paths. Just as it is equally as respectable for a trainer to travel to compete in the Pokemon League, the Grand Festival, or for any other goal. Ash felt a bit better after hearing that. Glad that his tendency to reset his team to just Pikachu in order to catch new Pokemon and learn was just as valid as using Pikachu, Charizard, Squirtle, Bulbasaur and the rest of the old guard from region to region. As you are now, you will be battling Brock's first badge team, Don George stated as the projector changed from showing the gym's epic fail reel Onix Smashes Common collection and going to a more directly educational one, showing a single Boulder Badge next to an image of a Geodude and Onix. Brock is a Pokémon breeder, who breeds his own Pokémon as well as the Pokémon of other clients. In doing so, he is one of the most flexible and most powerful of the Kanto gym leaders. While most, such as certain JRKs in Vermilion City, have to catch weaker Pokémon for first-timer challengers, Brock breeds them, and thus has more control of what Pokémon he fields. For those who may not have picked up what I hinted earlier, gym leaders are required to field different teams for different badge numbers. For example, if you had 4 badges and challenged Brock, his team would look like this. The display changed to show 4 Boulder Badges, and Geodude was replaced by a Graveler, while a Rhyhorn was added. Pika Pie? You know, this makes a lot of sense. After all, it wasn't like you had to go on a specific gym route or anything. A trainer starting from Cinnabar, for instance, couldn't exactly fight Magmar, and it would seem somewhat anticlimactic if the final gym battle that a trainer from Blackthorn City had in, say, Azalea Town involved a Metapod. Ash just shrugged, perhaps because of his battle style he didn't really think about tiered strength levels like this. Because he didn't focus on evolving his team, he would hold the 1-badge level team to the same standards as he would hold the 8-badge team. That was just him anyway, but when your Bulbasaur and Corphish could stand at the same level as a Meganium or Alakazam, you could be forgiven for not really considering things that way. As you earn more and more badges, the Pokémon that you could have to face diversify. These are among the Pokémon that Brock has been shown to use. The display started to show a wider amount of Pokémon with a number of badges around them, including some Golem, 7, 8, Rhydon, 6, 7, 8, Omanite, 2, 3, Omastar, Kabuto, 2, 3, Kabutops, 7, 8, Aerodactyl, 7, 8, Sudowoodo, 5, Shuckle, 3, Larvitar, 2, and Rhyperior, 8, as well as more Onix, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 and 8, Geodude, 2, 3, Rhyhorn, 3, 5, 6, and Graveler, 3, 5, 6. Man, I am so glad that Brock never used one of those teams on me, Ash muttered quietly to himself as Pikachu gave him a look. Pikachu Pikachu cha. Ash, I don't think gyms were quite like that back in the old timeline. For all you know, gym leaders used only singular sets of Pokémon, seeing as Lieutenant Surge only had 1 Raichu and seemingly no other Pokémon, Maylene only had 1 Lucario, Flannery was definitely too inexperienced to have trained more fire types, Sabrina definitely didn't go easy on anyone. Point taken, he whispered so only his mouse heard. Though he had to wonder how many other things about Brock had changed. Before any of you can battle Brock, you must prove to me that you are ready to do so. Per the Gym Leader Code of Conduct, a gym leader may set specific restrictions for who can or cannot battle them, as I'm sure many of you are aware with Viridian's restriction on anyone battling without at least 6 badges, and Brock's one and only restriction is that you must prove that you have actually trained for your battle and know what you're doing, in addition to making sure you are all properly registered for the Pokémon League of course. A few minutes later, Ash found himself in a lengthy line for access to a Pokeball registration machine, utterly bored. Didn't I already do this or something? He muttered to himself. Ash was pretty sure that he had handled all this paperwork at some point previously. Then again, he did have a unique favorable relationship with Professor Oak that most trainers did not have. Perhaps this was how most trainers who didn't get starter Pokémon, such as Stefan or Nando, had to deal with. Or perhaps it was a just new timeline thing. Next. Ash found himself up now, as Pikachu hopped down from his shoulder and Ash placed the ball containing Pidgeotto and Butterfree in the registration machine as he then reached into his pocket. Oh, a Butterfree and Pidgeotto? Not bad, at least you don't think you can defeat a gym leader with a Rattata and Caterpie. Don George fell silent at seeing what Ash pulled out. Is that a Pokédex? Ash nodded as Don grabbed the dex and activated it, similar to how the first Jenny Ash had met had once did. This unit, to be identified as Dexter Mark I, is a 6th-generation Pokémon digital database programmed for trainer Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town by Professor Samuel Oak. The dex blared out, now showing Ash's appearance. My function is to provide information on the various Pokémon this trainer is sure to encounter and general relevant information, as well as act as a general identification, including passport, credit card, and insurance card. If I am stolen and shown to be in the hands of another trainer, please arrest the thief and see me return to my trainer before he suffers a humiliating incident. Currently, this trainer has seen 21 Pokémon, those being Pikachu, Mr. Mime, Pidgey, Rattata, Spearow, Fearow, Psyduck, Chansey, Meowth, Ekans, Coughing, Staryu, Starmie, Wingull, Caterpie, Metapod, Butterfree, Weedle, Kakuna, Beedrill and Pinsir and has caught 5, and is unlicensed to drive or operate automobiles, drink alcohol or purchase tobacco. If he attempts to do any of these things, please call his mother at. Ash and Pikachu just stared at the electronic device in annoyance while Don George kept looking on in amazement, not even registering Delia's phone number. You're a Pokédex holder? Pokédex holder? That was a new term. Ash nodded as Don, of all things, bowed. My humble apologies for keeping you waiting. As you did not have a Kanto starter Pokémon on you, I did not immediately recognize who you were. Allow me to speed you along, sir. You certainly will not need to go through the required testing PRD and thus should go straight to the training section. He was quickly pushed along in his stunned state of paralysis by the overly cheerful Don. Gym room. In the original timeline, Ash had made use of the Battle Club's training facilities a number of times. Starting after he had trained for his rematch with Lenora and teaching Tepig Flame Charge and Oshawott Aqua Jet, he had later used the facilities to aid in the teaching of several moves, including Pignite's Brick Break, Leaveny's X-Scissor and Crocodile's Aerial Ace. Of course, the fact he had to work out in the process as well was odd, but not unwelcome, as Misty walked into the training area while Ash and Pikachu were simultaneously on a treadmill for the reteaching of Quick Attack, while Butterfree was flying in a wind tunnel and Pidgeotto flying through an obstacle course and smashing through targets, in their own training. I could have sworn it would take you far longer to get through those tests, Misty said matter-of-factly as Ash kept up the pace he had been on for a while. Apparently, having a Pokédex lets you cut in line, Ash absently stated as Misty looked at him in surprise. You really don't realize how big in value a Pokédex is, do you? Well, apparently it functions as a passport, credit card, and a "do not give this minor alcohol" warning, and probably a few hundred other things I don't know, so I guess I don't, Ash had to admit, and that wasn't even because his memories were still crazy mixed up, that was never covered by Oak or Summer Camp. Pokédexes were only first produced in the last 10 years, and so few of them have been made. The first 5 versions were given out only to the greatest trainers, such as Alder, Cynthia and Egan, because they take a lot of time to create, and the current model is only given out to trainers who start at Pokémon Labs. Each Pokédex is hand-assembled by a Pokémon professor, and constantly have to be upgraded for the latest in Pokémon research, which each Pokédex aids in by taking details on every Pokémon its owner comes across and sending them to the National Pokédex database, Misty explained before blushing, at least, according to the last National Pokegeographic I read, anyway. Pika, well, one timeline's common device is another timeline's uber-rare tech. Don George then chose to pop his head into the gym at this time as he said, "Sorry to keep you here so long, sir." Ash couldn't help but feel a certain level of satisfaction for being called sir. The last part of the testing must begin now. It's a battle round and thus it requires your presence. He then noted Misty as he then addressed her. Excuse me for asking, miss, but there is an odd number of trainers for this last round. I'd like to make it an even number if possible. Misty shrugged and replied, I got what I needed done, so I guess I have no reason not to. In the Battle Club tournament area. As per the Gym Leader Code of Conduct, each and every gym leader may set restrictions for those who wish to challenge them. Some require you to navigate a maze, others may quiz you in a volcano. Some may have no restrictions at all. The gym you are all applying for, however, requires a proper show of aptitude before you are given my final approval to enter into the waiting list for challenging Brock, and it shall be done so in a tournament. There are 16 of you here today, and of you any number of you are going to prove yourselves ready to fight Brock. The goal of this tournament is not to prove you're the strongest or the luckiest, but that you are competent. Last week's exam, in which 16 trainers battled to show their worth to me, I passed 5, and 3 of those 5 have managed to defeat Brock. The other 2, who managed to get farther than most of the pre-exam first-time challengers and defeated his Geodude, are currently training for their rematches. How much you willing to bet that Gary was one of them? Ash frowned. While Gary at this point in time was an outright butt, Ash was not going to say he was a talentless idiot. Gary knew what he was doing, and probably more so this time around because he no longer had a car or cheerleader squad with him. Still, it would be nice to think that, nor would he mind knowing who the other 2 trainers were who had recently defeated Brock. Now, let the battles begin. Show me you know what you're doing. The tournament. Ash was in the 3rd battle, and had his Pidgeotto against a Rattata. The rodent looked outright terrified with a bird that stood over 2 feet over it staring it down. The trainer of the Rattata, however, didn't seem as concerned as he should be about it. Rattata, the mouse Pokémon. Rattata are incredibly common and adaptive Pokémon which are capable of colonizing a wide variety of habitats, generally with the aid of stupid travelers. This was the first wind-up toy Pokémon known to have been made by Rumble. Ink, the Pokédex rang out from Ash's pocket as the battle began. Use focus energy, Rattata's trainer called out as the rodent began to glow white. Counter with gust. Pidgeotto took into the air and began to blow a powerful burst of wind into the rodent, which lost its grip on the ground with its little claws and was blown into the air. After a minute, the gust relented and the mouse was on the ground, struggling back up. Now, counter with quick attack. The Rattata's trainer ordered as a different white aura surrounded the little nibbler, before it burst forward at an impressive speed. Meet it head on Pidgeotto. A similar, but somehow more impressive white color surrounded Pidgeotto, who took off at the charging mouse at a faster speed. However, as the two speeding normal types approached, Rattata was able to avoid being hit due to its smaller size, and ended up striking a critical hit in the joint of Pidgeotto's right wing. Out of context, one could refer to this as a Farm Boy destroys ultimate weapon of Uber Sith Lord technique, -AY wing. It could also be considered a David vs. Goliath-esque trick for those who do not believe in the Force. As Rattata landed on uneasy legs from the previous gust attack, Pidgeotto just plain crashed to the ground. As Ash looked on with alarm, his first battle-captured Pokémon struggled up on her. Yes, it took Ash 2 timelines to realize that his Pidgeotto was female, but he was never really taught to look for it. Not only were Pokémon boy-girl bits not nearly as large or as noticeable as the biologically stacked in comparison humans, but it was considered weird, and abusive, to poke around trying down there to figure out the gender, feet, before flinching on her awkwardly angled wing. Outa, I think it's broken. His opponent however looked pleased. Now, finish it with Tackle Rattata. As the rodent charged for the injured bird for the knockout, Ash briefly was overwhelmed with fear for his Pokémon, just before his spontaneous side overtook his caring side as he told Pidgeotto, hurry, use Steel Wing to protect yourself. Caw! Use Steel Wing to. You know I really did miss your spontaneous side all these years, with a voice that went from an, are you crazy tone to a, that's brilliant one. Pidgeotto lifted her uninjured left wing up, which was glowing steel gray, and slammed it in front of itself like a wall with enough force to pierce the ground of the battlefield. The Rattata didn't have time to stop, and crashed into the steel wing, tottering backwards from it in a bit of an unnerving daze. Pie. That Rattata looks like it might have a concussion, Pikachu observed as Ash had an unnerved look. He didn't mean to do that. That rarely happened in battles in the old timeline. The only battles that did that much damage to a Pokémon were either long and intense, Charizard vs. Harrison's Blaziken, or done with that goal in mind, like Team Galactic and Paul. Pikachu quickly noticed Ash's anxiety. Pikachu, Ash, if it makes you feel better, we Pokémon heal from things like that much easier than humans. I'd say it would be more the equivalent of you scraping your knee after crashing a bicycle recovery-wise. Effect-wise, however, a concussion, while not as long-term as in a human, is still a bad thing for a Pokémon. The other trainer apparently did not see this or simply did not care as he insisted, come on Rattata, finish it. Hey, your Pokémon is too hurt, you should call it back before it really hurts itself. Ash yelled at his opponent. Oh shut up, I know what I'm. Rattata is unable to battle, the victory goes to Ash Ketchum and Pidgeotto. Dawn announced, apparently agreeing with Ash, with said muscled man now getting into a shouting match with the Rattata's trainer about Pokémon treatment. During this shouting match, Pokémon ethics, decent human decency and, you are not a Johto-born savage, being thrown into the mix. Ash really wasn't paying much attention to the specifics as he was more concerned about his injured Pidgeotto. I'm sorry, he apologized as he knelt down in front of his bird and gently stroked her back, this caught me off guard. His first flying type captured softly cooed and rubbed herself against his hand and told him, it will heal with Nurse Joy quickly enough, that much hasn't changed at least. However, I don't think I can battle Brock again. Sigh, I was hoping to settle the score with Geodude, all that effort with Steel Wing wasted. Hey, you can have the next. Ash paused for a moment, considering Misty's changes in this timeline. Was her family even still in charge of Cerulean Gym, if there even was one? Then the next gym leader that he thought of in Vermilion City would be even worse. With that thought came a horror-filled image of Lieutenant Surge's Raichu destroying Pidgeotto rather literally with Thunderbolt. He decided to finally finish by telling her, you know, let's just play it by ear about your gym battle. Ash returned her to her ball, where the damage she took would not cause her more pain. Later in battle number, Wingull use wing attack. Misty's Wingull slammed its glowing wings into a crab-like, pinkish-red mushroom crab, who was knocked to the ground defeated. Paras, the mushroom Pokémon. Paras is covered with mushrooms, which are actually slowly taking over the mind and body of the Paras, which is completed by its evolved Parasect state. Other Pokémon. Do not eat this evolutionary line, for doing so will infect them with the mushrooms. The The result of this idiotic action in both humans and Pokémon is the basis of Pokestar horror films. That means you, Ash. The Pokédex was again giving Ash not only information he never needed to know, but also having attitude. Did it really think that he would eat strange mushrooms from the back of a Pokémon? Well, maybe he could try offering some to Gary the next time he ran into him, he thought maliciously, then have his grandpa Professor Oak screen him for a drag test. He'd never do it, but it was oh so fun to imagine it as he grinned. Still he managed to focus back on the task at hand, namely round 2, and another young trainer. Beedrill, go! His opponent announced, letting loose the infamous giant bee of doom, its twin stingers dripping a poison from them that made the ground steam as it dripped down. Butterfree, I choose you. Ash countered, his butterfly battler coming out to combat its fellow final bug evolution. Beedrill, the poison bee Pokémon. Beedrill attack their enemies in swarms and sting them rapidly with their stingers. During the pre-Oak centuries, human attempts to exterminate Beedrill populations led to a decimation of weaker Beedrill, unintentionally accelerating biological battle evolution to allow for post-sting survival and increasing human by Beedrill fatalities by 251%. This unit needs no more evidence that humans are flawed creatures. Ash just whacked the thing to shut it up. Even if it did have a point, Beedrill were near the top of the list of Pokémon you wouldn't want to make more aggressive or deadly. Begin. Go Beedrill, use Twineedle. The bug type came flying at his first Pokémon caught, with barbs coated in poison. Time to try out that new move of yours, use Gust. Butterfree began flapping its wings rapidly, unleashing a powerful gust attack that stopped the bee in its flight, and blew it back and caused it to crash into the ground. Ash briefly was worried he might have injured the bug, but it got up pretty easily. Counter with Poison Sting, his opponent called out as the insect, standing up on the ground, pointed its left stinger at Butterfree and let the purple barbs fly towards Butterfree. Dodge and use Tackle. Its wings still fine, Butterfree dodged the barbs and flew right into the bug. Harden. The carapace of the Beedrill shimmered briefly, causing Butterfree's tackle to fizzle out and seemed to do more to Butterfree, in a headache, than Beedrill. Free, out. Did someone catch the number on that oak tree? Great, his Pokémon had a thing for oak trees, that was just perfect. He seriously hoped Butterfree just had its mind seriously addled. Twineedle while it's distracted Beedrill. The bee held its purple-tipped stingers up like a pair of swords and began rapidly stabbing them at Butterfree, who dodged the attacks, if in somewhat of a daze. Stop it with confusion. Ash had not particularly wanted to use this move, if simply because they were still working on mastering it. This was a particular issue as, of the moves he had been working with his Pokémon to relearn, or in some cases, learn for the first time, Iron Tail and Quick Attack for Pikachu, Steel Wing for Pidgeotto and Gust for Butterfree, he had some idea of how they worked, though Steel Wing not to the same extent as it was a move that his fletchling had known when he caught it and, due to the world ending, he hadn't the time to really grasp the basics of how it works or how you would go about teaching it. However, it was the best choice at this point, considering that Twineedle could poison Butterfree even if he could use Harden as a defense. Butterfree responded with glowing blue eyes, surrounding the large bee with a blue aura. The aura blinked on and off, the move not being completely mastered being a problem that Ash was quite aware of. However, it gave Butterfree the time he needed to fly out of the way of the Twineedle, and end up behind Beedrill. Now, give it a sleep powder, he commanded Butterfree. A storm of shimmering powder was blown from Butterfree's wings, covering the outflanked insect and causing it to fall to the ground below, deep in sleep. Luckily for Ash's morality, and concern about the differences in effects of battling possibly meaning it was now far less ethical to use Flamethrower on a sleeping Pokémon, Beedrill's trainer was less of an but. This is enough, you won. He returned his Beedrill and Ash's Butterfree, as the two foes walked up to one another, and shook hands. Always right to be polite, after all. Unless of course it was a member of a criminal organization trying to steal your Pokémon, but they usually tended to blast off somewhere at this point anyway. The trainer on the other side of the tournament who saw his Pidgey blasted out of the sky by Stereo's water gun, however, was far less polite about it. So, you think he's going to let me go on to fight Brock? Ash inquired to Misty after she had finished, who shrugged. Probably, aside for the fact that you're a Pokédex holder and thus he worships the ground you walk on, Misty commented, which Ash still found that to be somewhat unnerving. You've done well in your last 2 battles. You have a decent strategic mind and are concerned with the well-being on your Pokémon. With a lot of people, particularly in Kanto and Hoenn from what I've heard, you could be the next Cynthia when it comes to battling skills, but if you were but to your Pokémon, no one would give you a pass. At least if it was visible. Region talk again. Ash thought for a moment about how to phrase the question he wanted to ask before going for it. I never really was that interested in politics, and neither was my mother. She often turned any political talk off on the television at home, so I might be a little clueless on what you mean by Kanto and Hoenn. Pokémon abuse laws first started being proposed 40 years ago, Misty began. However, some regions are more progressive on them than others. Hoenn was the first to pass them, and has some of the most comprehensive. Kanto is the next most liberal. The laws are somewhat newer, but just as comprehensive. On the other end of the spectrum, Johto has barely passed any such laws. It's a rural and conservative place where slowpoke tails are still treated as a delicacy, and the Orange Islands are only slightly better. Sinnoh is somewhere in between the two extremes. I don't know the exacts of the laws in Unova and Kalos, but I'm told they are generally akin to Kanto and Hoenn in that regard. Ash thought on that. While the thought of anyone abusing Pokémon was horrid to him, he knew that it wasn't a universally held idea. While he had no idea why Hoenn would be the most friendly region, then again, he had a hard time imagining any region being unfriendly to Pokémon. Ash did have to recall that the villainous teams of Hoenn, Team Aqua and Magma, weren't as bad as the other villainous teams he had encountered. They were by no means good teams, but he had seen far worse deeds done by Teams Rocket, Galactic and Plasma in the old timeline. Of course, they still did attempt to control environmental altering Pokémon of mass destruction, so they were still evil, but perhaps just not as evil as Cyrus or Getsis. Not that being less evil than those two was that hard. Though, it was possible that Getsis in this timeline was a benevolent orphanage operator who had donated his millionaire status to charity. Not likely but still possible. With those thoughts on his mind, Ash found himself up against a third opponent, who looked confident. Go, Spearow! The agonizingly familiar bird Pokémon flew out of its ball, fluttering to the ground as Ash and Pikachu looked mildly upset. They had hoped to get a chance to test out Quick Attack's successful retraining, but still, payback was in order. Ash motioned for Pikachu to jump off his shoulder, as the Spearow and its trainer both suddenly had looks of sheer terror. With some degree of glee, he thought, this is going to be fun. Pikachu, Thundershock. Zap. Spearow is unable to battle, Pikachu is the winner. That was easy. The other battle. Misty's Psyduck hadn't been planning on being used to battle, but he did manage to blast a Zubat out of the picture after it had used Supersonic and given it a headache. Some things had remained the same, and it would appear that Psyduck was just as dangerous as Pikachu in its own way. Dawn coughed as the two remaining trainers, Ash and Misty, stood before him. Specifically, he coughed after Misty gave him a sharp look. When we began this exam, there were 15 trainers who sought to get my permission to challenge Brock, so I had asked an additional trainer to come in to make it a simple 16, and save us all the headache of a misnumbered tournament. As her opponent has shown himself ready for a gym battle in my eyes, and in part because she is glaring at me, the last part was muttered more to himself, we shall conclude this exam with 4 trainers out of 15 having shown themselves ready to face Brock, though technically 5 out of 16 in all accounts. A lot of annoyed commotion followed as the 2 other passing trainers joined him up on the stands, the noise preventing him from getting any sort of name identification. However, informally in his head he noted them as Beedrill Guy, Zubat Guy, and Spearow Guy. Please train further, regardless of if you have passed or not, for the challenges to come. I'll fill the 3 passing trainers in on their appointments with Brock after I confirm it with Brock himself so your appointments can be made. Please note that, if you lose your gym battle, you will have to reschedule on your own time. Later that night, at the Pokémon Center, Pidgeotto had a cast on her wing, and would have it for at least a week. That was the bad news, and it was hard to figure out who was taking it worse, the trainer who had put her out in a battle that could hurt her like that, or the bird who wasn't going to be able to fight for a while. At least the Nurse Joy in charge of the Pokémon Center, Ash had been concerned that the Jennies and Joys would no longer be identical individuals. That would be weird and a different kind of weird than their general identicalness, didn't bear down on him for it. She had actually praised his concern and promptness with her injury. Ash didn't know if he should blush at the praise, or pale at the idea that concern about your Pokémon was warranted of such praise. Though the free food was quite a nice reward, particularly because they were always hungry, for both humans and Pokémon. However, they also had to eat next to a large tank in order to allow the feeding of all of Misty's Pokémon, in particular, her Goldeen and Horsia, which Ash had not expected her to have had so early. You did well today, Ash, Misty told him with a smile. You know, it's sometimes hard to actually believe you started out with Pokémon not even a month ago. Most rookie trainers lack the connection and understanding you have with Pokémon. Well, I went to a Pokémon summer camp to qualify for a Pokédex, so I managed to learn a thing or two, he admitted before blushing as he was he even lying for that matter? For all he knew, that was the truth. So, you're using Butterfree and Pikachu in your gym battle, correct? Misty inquired. Yep, Ash nodded. It was his only plan anyway. It wasn't like he was going to only bring a single Pokémon to a gym battle. Again, he had learned that lesson with Alessa. After you finish that battle, I happen to have done some fact-checking, and remember how I said I was going to check some things while we were here, she asked. At Ash's positive nodding, she elaborated on it. I recall learning of a public library in Cameron Palace, a location that has a lengthy tradition of bloodline users. Their legendary hero, Sir Aaron, was said to be one, and if there is any place we can figure out why your powers are different from mine, it would be there. Plus, it allows us both to take a detour around Cerulean City. That caught the 4 fully returned individuals who had been previously eating, Ash, Pikachu, Butterfree and Pidgeotto, off guard. That was certainly an unexpected request. Cautiously, Ash inquired further, but isn't there a gym in Cerulean City? I could have sworn I had read it was filled with water types. He gestured at Pikachu, trying to write off his inquiry about Cerulean as a completely gym-based question, with no possible context related to Misty's possibly no longer present genetic connection to the gym staff. Misty looked grim as she asked, "Do you want my help, Ash?" Ash nodded without hesitation. "Then we don't set foot in Cerulean City, at all," Misty declared, and that was all she would elaborate on the subject. Later that night, Pikachu trotted alongside Ash as he took a late-night stroll through town, trying to think. Cameron Palace. And this Cerulean thing, what did they mean? Pika Pai Chuu. Okay, how much are you willing to bet that aura has something to do with it? Ash just stared at Pikachu as he pointed out, "You do know aura isn't the answer to everything, right, Pikachu? I actually did ask Riley about it on Iron Island, and he stated that if I wanted to learn aura, I'd have to seclude myself away from civilization for a few years. As much as I'd love to hide out as some mountain hermit with you, Charizard, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Snorlax and whoever else for a few years, I can't isolate myself like that. It's just not me." However, he'd no longer have to worry about washing himself so much, even if it would earn him the nickname Ash Stinkum. On the other hand, he'd have to learn to feed himself. Cha Paichu. Yeah, but look at it this way, Ash, you have strange powers, and Misty is directing you to the place that stated directly you already had strange powers. For all you know, you're going to have to learn to sense the living aura in everything, fight the dark side of aura on a daily basis, and possibly have to go to some hidden castle school to learn it for 7 years before rejoining a hidden aura world or something. Ash just stared at his walking companion as he remarked, "You do realize that this is neither Tatooine nor Hogwarts, right, Pikachu?" Pikachu just shrugged. He had seen the movies at Oak's lab, and liked them. He would have loved to meet Hagrid or R2-D2. R2, and he could even have electric shock wars. However, as they discussed the question of how likely it was Sir Aaron, Lucario and Destiny was going to be involved, more of Ash trying to figure out any possible alternative really, they unintentionally ran into a problem. They ran out of road and found themselves in a place filled with fog. "What the DMN it's Johto all over again," Ash stated in a fury. They were lost. Deeply, utterly, lost. Pi? Why is it all misty all of the sudden? When does Pewter have fog? Ash drew a Pokeball, but quickly deactivated it. It was Pidgeotto's ball, and she was not up to defogging anywhere. Or, de-smokescreen for that matter. Hopefully Team Rocket was not around today, and he was not in the mood for them to pop up. Thankfully, Team Rocket, having reported into Giovanni that Ash had been training all day at the Battle Club, were currently in a hotel with room service and a rented Breaking Bad DVD for the evening. They wouldn't be coming out for a while for obvious reasons. Of course, Ash had no idea about what they were doing, so he had just the same urgency as if they were breathing down his neck, as they had done in the old timeline. Heck, the lack of them was getting to him a bit. Thankfully, this was one of the few times in his journey he had 2 flyers on hand, and who would not scorch his face or just make things worse. Ash quickly let loose his other flying type out, and his Butterfree fluttered up in front of him and Pikachu. "Free? You know, Ash, I adore any moment to fly after having to spend time in a cocoon again, but this isn't exactly what I'd call ideal flying conditions. It's all foggy." "Yeah, can you blow it away so we can at least figure out if we wandered all the way to Snowpoint City or not?" "Free? I don't know defog though." "Pi! Did that ever stop any of us from blowing away smokescreen from wheezing?" Butterfree couldn't figure out anything wrong about that logic, and commenced to blow with his wings with all the force he could, causing the fog to be blown away, just with a bit less flair and permanence than if the proper move had been used. As the fog began to dissipate away, Ash began to see something faintly visible, which he began to squint at to figure out what it exactly was. As soon as he could see it, he wished he couldn't. Here lies Flint and Lola Harrison. Beloved husband, wife, father, mother. He was looking at a pair of graves of Brock's parents. It was so shocking that he willed his legs to get him as far away from it as possible, and they did dot with a familiar white glow. Pikachu and Butterfree just stared in shock as Ash quick attacked himself into a tree behind him. It couldn't be. This wasn't supposed to happen. He began to weep. At least in the original timeline Brock's dad had been around, but now it appeared that Brock and all of his siblings were orphans. Just how messed up was that? Several awkward minutes later. I killed Brock's parents. Ash muttered for the 10th time as his 2 released Pokémon walked and fluttered alongside him. Free. Should we focus more on the fact that Ash just did, apparently, another Pokémon technique that goes against what Misty said was possible? Pikachu. No, let's focus on Ash and Brock's parents before we question Ash's ability to defy logic. I killed. Pikachu decided to take the tough road and just take a tough love approach and yell at Ash, Cha-chu Pikachu cha. You did not kill anyone. Brock's parents are dead because I caused time. Free. To restart after a crazed Blue Annette decided to break it. They'd have been dead if you hadn't done anything. Cha. And it's not like you even know what exactly killed them. Ash would have continued this conversation, but they had managed to walk all the way back to the Pokémon Center, where Don George was waiting for them. It wouldn't do to talk about time travel around someone who was quite out of the know after all. Oh, there you are, champ in the making, Don greeted in a cheerful tone, totally unaware of the somber mood that Ash was still in. Glad to see you made it back. I have great news. You're first up for battling Brock. It's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, right after Brock is finished with his date with his girlfriend. I heard they're getting pretty serious. Heard a rumor he was browsing the local jewelry store for diamonds the other day. And to think they had met at SteelixCon just 2 years ago. The last part was Don muttering to himself. It took the limited amount of tact Ash had, which was normally used for battle tactics, such as hiding the ace in the hole, not to outright express how shocking that was. The idea of Brock having a girlfriend was just ludicrous, and against cosmic law. Pikachu had no such restraint, and collapsed. Butterfree, having had less exposure to Brock's antics, particularly when they got more desperate, just fluttered in place. Your Pikachu looks all tuckered out. You better make sure it gets some rest for tomorrow. Brock has 9 younger siblings, and they will want to hug the poor thing. You better make sure he can run away from them, Don told him, and with that jolly note, Don George walked away as the fainted Pikachu revived himself. Chew? I had a nightmare that I just found out Brock had a girl. He looked at the astonished Ash. He has a girlfriend, doesn't he? Ash just nodded, still in shock about it himself. Free Butterfree, well I suppose it shouldn't be a nightmare Pikachu, I think that's what humans do for some odd reason including Brock. Besides he was bound to get lucky sometime. Yeah, the 1000th time is the charm, Ash replied in the most conservative estimate for Brock's antics. The next morning. Ash, Pidgeotto, Butterfree and Pikachu were sitting around their room in the Pokémon Center Hotel, in part to discuss the Brock question, and in part to avoid accidentally encountering a showering Misty. She had stated quite often during the trip through Viridian Forest she needed a shower. While she probably could do that whirlpool thing of hers as a shower, Ash didn't know if she could, plus there was that whole guy walks in on showering girl routine that Misty probably was aware of. Ash didn't trust his luck not to end up ruining his first companion's friendship in this new world by unintentionally seeing her naked, even if his Pokémon didn't consider being seen naked a big deal as they were always naked. So, Brock has a girlfriend at last, and with his parents. He is now the sole caretaker of his siblings, assuming the girlfriend doesn't live with him or something, Pidgeotto surmised. So, what does this mean for possibly Pikachu? Assuming we can actually fully restore his memories, which based on Misty isn't quite the case with people. Can we really give him back any sort of memory at all? At Ash's alarmed look, Pikachu elaborated, Pikachu chacho. Look at it this way, let's say that we did try to fix his memories, say using my own shock therapy, and only a part of them came back. If he gets even a faint bit of his old memories back, he will want to help by his nature alone. What happens if he gets torn between his siblings and girlfriend, quite possibly fiancé, and a feeling he needs to be saving the world? Ash paled as he questioned, what if he hates me for causing his parents to die? Pikachu resisted the urge to shock him due to that being a legitimate concern. Free, Ash, Butterfree said remorsefully, I fear that, for the good of Brock. He can't remember a thing. Brock. Ash sounded remorseful at the thought of having to abandon Brock. Pidgeotto and Butterfree gave him sad looks as Pidgeotto said, Ash, you once let Butterfree go for him to find love, and you let me go to protect those who could not protect themselves. You must let Brock go for these very reasons. A sad-looking Ash nodded at their reasoning, but still, tears were visible from his face. This stunk. No Brock with him on his journey. Well, he'd definitely miss him, and not just because of his cooking. Of course he had to think of food at a time like this, he chided himself. Free. So. When do we talk about Ash teaching himself quick attack? Sure. Do you think it's worth trying to figure out who he could possibly be dating? Ash brought up the big question, and got no good responses. 2 p.m. The Pewter Gym. The stone battle arena that had been the host of Ash's first gym battle, his first lost battle and his first gym victory, was revisited for a battle that meant more to Ash than a simple gym battle ever did. It was a battle Ash did not want to fight, a rare event indeed, yet Ash did not want to have to come back for another one. It was something he doubted he could repeat, or even gather the nerve for. Ash didn't know if he should have been happy or depressed that nothing happened when he shook Brock's hand to start the match. No memories at all seemed to go back to Brock. Even if that meant that Brock wouldn't get the emotional chaos as he struggled between his family and the world, it still was depressing. His friend would never be coming back. Let's make this a good match. I am grateful that you could battle me so quickly. Ash managed to keep the sadness out of his voice as Brock smiled in a heart-aching familiar way. You actually seem to be a polite young fellow, so much nicer than the last 3 trainers I've fought, Brock admitted. The 2 other Pokédex holders I ran into were well buttes. He said the last part somewhat quietly as his siblings were in the stands watching the battle, alongside Misty and a few gym personnel and local people, including a disguised Team Rocket trio among them, not that Ash could tell. And the other one, another guy with a Pikachu, was not much of a talker at all. Ash barely even registered what Brock said. He didn't put much thought into the other Pokédex user who was not Gary or the other Pikachu guy. However, I doubt you came for small talk. The official gym battle between the gym leader, Brock, and the challenger, Ash of Pallet Town, will now begin. Each trainer will use only 2 Pokémon, and the match will be over when either side is out of usable Pokémon. In addition, only the challenger may substitute his Pokémon. Trainers ready? The next oldest sibling, Forest, was refereeing as both trainers drew Pokeballs. Go, Geodude. Butterfree, I choose you. The battle began as the animated stone with arms faced the giant butterfly, and while the Pokédex was rolling, it, perhaps sensing the mood, did not make a witty comment about Geodude. Geodude, start this off with Tackle. Brock commanded his Pokémon. Squirtle, use Hydro Pump. Ash thought to himself. Unfortunately he did not have Squirtle yet, so he supposed he would have to make do. The stone being used its muscular arms to launch himself upward to the bug type, intent on knocking it down. Counter with Confusion. Ash called, wanting to end this quickly as Butterfree's eyes glowed blue for just long enough to slam Geodude back down. Brock gritted his teeth as he told his Pokémon, don't give up Geodude, use Rock Tomb. Geodude shouted as a large gray boulder began to form above its arms. Snare it up with String Shot before it can launch that attack. Ash countered just as quickly as String flew from his first bug type, ensnaring the stone and binding it to the ground like a funhouse, with 4 lengthy string segments going from the center of the stone into the ground, barely avoiding crushing Geodude. Impressive, Brock commended, glad to see a nice challenger who knows what he's doing, but we're not done, not by a long shot. Geodude, Rock Smash. Geodude's fist glowed reddish-orange as it launched itself at Butterfree. Tackle. The quarter-effective move. Clashed with the half-effective move, as the 2 clashed again and again across the battlefield once, then twice, then a third time as the 2 seemed evenly matched due to stats and type. Stun Spore. Mud Sport. Geodude launched itself into the air and impacted himself into the ground, sporting up a protective mud spurt that caught all the status powder in its tracks. Now, charge up a Rock Tomb while the mud protects you from String Shot. Brock commanded as Geodude began to form the boulder from beneath the rising mud sport. Use Gust to blow that mud back to Geodude. Butterfree flew up into the sky as he let loose a powerful wind burst into the mud, rebounding it downwards and on top of Geodude. Geodude stopped the Rock Tomb charging as it began to feel the effects of the spore. Oh no! Brock shouted in shock. Now, use Confusion to send it into the wall, Ash shouted as Butterfree fluttered down in front of the paralyzed stone Pokémon with glowing blue eyes, causing Geodude to be surrounded by the glow and slammed into the wall, where it laid KO'd. Geodude is unable to battle, this round goes to Ash and Butterfree. Forest sounded depressed, clearly not happy about the results as Brock returned his Geodude before turning to Ash. Using a flying attack to counter a rock type, in particular my defense I developed for Butterfree specifically? I must say Ash, you're quite clever. However, Boulder Badges don't just grow on trees, nor are they free to pluck as you wish. To win, you still have to defeat my second Pokémon, Onix. Of course he did, he realized grimly as he wished that Brock had chosen a Bonesley instead. Pikachu could just make a face and the match would go to him. Instead he could only stare with determination, and still some sadness, as the giant rock snake, no longer an evolved Steelix, rose up from the energy of Brock's Pokeball to stare them down. Begin. Let's start this off with Screech. Brock decided to get things going on a high note, literally speaking, as a sonic blast flew out from Onix's mouth and straight at Butterfree. Hurry, dodge. It was too late, as Butterfree was caught in the sound blast and slammed down into the ground of the arena. Now, use Tackle. The great train that was Onix charged towards the downed Bug-type, who was still struggling back into the air from the force of the impact. Sleep Powder. Ash called out as Butterfree managed to, with some cringing, let loose a few of the sleep-causing spores. Onix, stop and use Screech again. Onix ceased his charge attack as another sound tunnel flew from its mouth, blowing away the sleep powder and striking Butterfree with all the force needed to send him right into the air, from where he dropped like a lead balloon. Thankfully Ash managed to run right into the battle and catch his falling Pokémon, not wanting another injured friend on his hands with the severity of Pidgeotto. Butterfree is now forfeited from the match. The winner is Onix, Forest called as Brock nodded. Saving your Pokémon from a potentially severe injury is always the right thing to do, and I applaud you for it. While I could disqualify you for running onto the field like that, I do not need to, nor shall I. I only wish that the young man from Sinnoh had that same instinct. Ash returned Butterfree to his ball, not registering that last part. Pikachu, it's all up to you, buddy. He told his electric companion of many a year, in theory, considering how Ash couldn't recall how old he had been in Kalos, as his electric mouse burst onto the battlefield. To Brock's credit, he didn't even raise an eyebrow over the type issues. Begin. Onix, let's finish this off with Screech. Dodge with Quick Attack and get in close. The white outline around Pikachu sped him up enough to easily avoid the sound tunnel that had gotten Butterfree as the mouse approached the snake. Use Rock Throw. Stones shot out from Onix's body and flew towards Pikachu like missiles. Expertly, Pikachu dodged each and every one as he got up close and personal with Onix's body. Gutsy, but foolish. You can't beat Onix with Quick Attack, and Thundershock will have no effect whatso. Pikachu, use Iron Tail. Wah! Brock said in alarm. He grinned a bit at taking Brock by surprise like that. Pikachu's tail turned to a steel-like color as it began to swing it. Onix, quickly use Harden. A shimmer covered Onix's entire body just before the Iron Tail struck, dropping the damage it did to the powerful beast. So, we're going to have to force our way through, is it? Fine, Pikachu, Rapid Iron Tails. Onix, use Bide. Ash only registered what Brock had called for as Onix began to glow a brownish white. Wait, Pikachu, stop and get out of there with Quick Attack. Pikachu did stop, but by the time it had already delivered 3 Iron Tails, but responded just fast enough with a Quick Attack springboarded from Onix's head. Now, let's end this, unleash the power of Bide. Brock called out as the brown light all congealed in front of Onix's mouth as a huge burst of power flew from Onix and straight towards the retreating Pikachu. Block it with Thundershock. Pika Chu. Pikachu began to glow yellow as a powerful electric burst flew right into the oncoming Bide blast. You overestimate yourself if you think a simple attack can equal the power of 3 super effective moves. Brock began before the two energies met, with the Bide briefly dominate before all the power was absorbed into, and fire with, the Thundershock straight into Onix. The power from Thundershock didn't harm Onix at all, but the Bide did, as it got a face full of all the damage it had taken previously, ×2. This was too much for the rock snake, and it fell over, defeated in a huge smack to the ground. Impossible. It cannot be. Brock said in complete surprise. Onix.is unable to battle, Forest announced lamely, the winner is Pikachu, and the battle, and the badge, go to Pikachu and Ash of Pallet Town. The two old companions just stared. Pi. We beat Onix with electric attacks. Again? Ash, who had asked Butterfree and Pikachu to not mentally be commanded due to Ash finding it harder to hear them when he wasn't focusing on it, with his focus instead on the battle at hand, only just nodded in shock as Brock returned his Onix and walked towards Ash. Of the last 3 trainers to battle me, 2 of them began with type-advantaged starter Pokémon, and the third was a tactician of impressive merit, who used similarly type-disadvantaged Pokémon. You, on the other hand, Ash, think on your feet with such astonishing skill. I am inspired myself to learn from it. Brock mused as he reached into his pocket and took out a badge in the shape of a gray octagon, as well as a USB drive of some sort. Take this, Ash, the Boulder Badge is yours. You have more than earned it today, and I expect great things from you. If I don't see you in the Indigo Conference, I'm going to be disappointed. So, to help you along, I'll give you this. He noted the USB drive. This is a TM, or technical manual. It contains the instructions for training most any move a Pokémon can learn, and which Pokémon can learn it. Gym leaders and breeders get these in the mail, so I have plenty to spare. You have to occasionally update it when someone manages to teach a new move to a Pokémon species, like the guy in Kalos who got Squirtless to use Aura Sphere, but it's pretty much up to date with everything you could need to know. You can plug it into your Pokédex, I believe, so good luck out there. There are all kinds of trainers in the world, Ash, and I can't wait to see what kind of trainer you turn out to be. While Ash tried to be strong as he got the badge and TM, nodded to Brock in respect, and turned to leave to get Butterfree and Pikachu healed, plus to get ready to go to Cameron Palace with Misty, only a single thought remained to him, a thought that prevented him from doing his traditional victory pose, which somehow did not stand out as strange in this world by any means. Goodbye, Brock. Ash thought with a level of sadness that was alien to him. Even if he wasn't depressed, he probably would not have noticed Team Rocket watching him, and then sneaking off to report to their boss he had just won a gym badge. Empty Moon. The shadowy caverns of this great mountain were famous for many things. The Zubat swarms, the fossil deposits, the Zubat swarms, the many extraterrestrial sightings, the Zubat swarms. The deposits the Zubat swarms made. Yes, there were in fact a lot of Zubat in Mount Moon. However, Ash would not be running into them this time around. Pikachu, use Thundershock, an unknown voice shouted in the echoed confines of the cave as a burst of electricity struck into a Zubat swarm, blasting all of them away from a shaking mass beneath them. The Zubat, upon being electrocuted, flew away en masse, as the shaking mass stopped. This mass, when no longer covered in Zubat, was quite noticeable to be that of a female human, though not female in the same way as Misty, for this girl was far younger. She looked to be only 10 in fact. The girl's clothes, formerly a yellow vest and a black undershirt and pants, were torn in several places from Zubat bites. Her ponytailed blonde hair was in disarray from the attack, and a straw hat she had previously been wearing lay off her side, now utterly ruined with all sorts of holes and gashes. She looked up at her savior in shock and wonder. As for the identity of this still as yet unknown stranger, his face was veiled by shadows, with only his fiery eyes visible through the darkness, and a Pikachu quickly climbed up his shoulder, though not with the same familiarity and expertise that Ash's Pikachu had in doing the same such task. The girl looked up at her savior, her brown eyes wide in awe and admiration, the little marks under her eyes making her look even more adorable as she did so. Oh, make canon relativity to the reset universe, non-canon. Get an original idea. Crossoverpairinglover Studios. The four main characters of Cross Studios, the blonde-haired, orange ninja Naruto, the bespectacled wizard Harry Potter, sea green-eyed demigod Percy Jackson and Ash of Pallet Town were reading the latest story ideas to come down the pipe, all looking nauseous. Not again. Ash yelled, slamming his paper to the table, not willing to look at it anymore. Really? Percy remarked next, looking quite peeved as well. This has to be the third one this week, Harry added. Naruto just stabbed his huge stack of paper with a kunai knife. What is with all these betrayal FIC ideas? Ash complained, it seems like nearly every story coming out into the market nowadays involves everyone betraying me, including most of my Pokémon. Does the, at times admittedly disturbing idea of Pokeball-based absolute loyalty mean anything to these writers? I mean really, just because some new son of Poseidon or Zeus or Ares or anyone really comes into Camp Half-Blood and kills a monster doesn't mean everyone's going to admire him like the Second Coming, Percy agreed. At least you don't get thrown into Azkaban all the time, Harry sulked. I'm tired of going to prison for something I didn't do. I get thrown into a literal hell far too often, does that count? Percy offered, I'd count House of Hades as that being literal, but I wasn't banished there by the gods, Annabeth, and I fell into Tartarus, and I don't even want to see if that increased the amount of fics sending me down there or not. That might be canon for me with that blood prison thing. Do the movies count for me? I mean, some of the Shippuden arcs are borderline canon-ish, Utakata and the Three Tails. Naruto offered. Canonicity or not, you got framed by a shapeshifter. These fics seem to think all our friends are going to one day betray us all, and somehow lead us to turn into dark anti-heroes, Harry observed with a frown. Do the fans really think so lowly of our friends? Some do, but I think it's more than that, Ash suggested. The problem is that fanfiction writers do cliché stories far too often, and do them shallowly. Where once there might have been betrayal fics and ignored Uzumaki twin fics and wrong boy who lived fics, people don't put the same effort into making them deep and semi-plausible. So what, we send a request to ask fan fiction writers to be more unique? Harry suggested. Fan fiction and unique don't go that well together. Recall we're pretty much stolen ideas, Percy snarked. No, Harry's right. Fan fiction writers need to be more aware of what fics are out there and put more effort into avoiding copying other ideas, shallow or not. Hopefully if they do that, the author can actually find new stories that are not all the same old, dark idea done poorly, Naruto added. Like what? Ash questioned, having betrayal fics where people turn on me because they were all paid to go with me by my Darth Father Giovanni? As somewhat doable as that sounds, it's possible for people to actually become real friends. Pokémon Special pulled the false friends become real friends cliché off a few times last I checked, in the Diamond and Pearl chapter, and perhaps in the Black and White chapter, I'm not sure. Or, perhaps if they really want to write betrayal fics. I actually have no clue where they'd be actually a good idea. I mean, I would say Star Wars and have Anakin be betrayed by the Council, but that could also affect Padme, who the author sees as the holder of Anakin's sanity, particularly after Season 5. Maybe some people just like dark and broody stories while the author is abnormal in his dislike of them. I mean, he is sort of crazy, just look at some of his ideas. Harry offered, there was Devil Luna a while ago, not sure where she got off to. He apparently thinks that Teletoon XD character Helios is what happens when Hermione and me have a kid, and then gets raised by Voldemort and Bellatrix, and I've heard rumors of the alternate universe Darth Sidious just waiting to appear. Who has spoken my name? A multi-layered, nightmare-inducing voice surrounded the four as a dark mist surrounded them all. As Naruto formed a hand sign, Harry drew his wand, Percy his sword and Ash a pokeball, a figure began walking towards them. A tall, I-stalked amphibious figure. Now, Mesa shall smite you for it, the evil Jar Jar Binks who exists in the author's plot Bunny Farm spoke in a tone that overlaid his own with the voices of beings like Trigon, Darth Sidious, certain Megatrons and Thanos, as he drew a huge chakram that looked like a oversized version of something Axel would use, which ignited 4 red lightsabers from each spike, as the build creature let loose hellfire from its mouth, ending the Omake on an epic level as clones and Pokémon swarmed him. While several spells flew in support with a huge tidal wave of water.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.